Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. The sound nearly threw me out of bed. That piercing alarm tone ripped through my room, vibrating against the nightstand and rattling the water glass I had left there. I fumbled for my phone, eyes still sticky with sleep, and when the screen lit up, it was bathed in red. At first, my brain did not even register the words, just the color, that blood-red glow in the dark. Then the message came into focus. Emergency alert. Unauthorized children sighted in residential zones. Do not approach, do not respond. Remain indoors until further notice. I blinked at the screen, still half tangled in the sheets. My heart thumped, but not the way it would if there was a fire or tornado warning. This was different. The phrasing itself felt wrong, like it had been written by someone trying to sound official but missing the mark. Unauthorized children. What did that even mean? I let out a shaky laugh, the kind you use when you are trying to convince yourself that everything is normal. Maybe it was some kind of hack or a test that had gone out to the wrong group of people. I glanced at the time. 11:49 at night. No traffic, no planes overhead, no storm outside my window, just silence. I tossed the phone back onto the nightstand and lay there, staring at the ceiling. The glow from the alert still burned in my eyes, even after the screen went dark. My house was quiet, too quiet. Normally I could hear the fridge humming downstairs or the occasional groan of the old floorboards settling, but that night, everything felt suspended. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket up to my chin, but sleep would not come back. My mind replayed the words over and over. Unauthorized children, do not engage, remain indoors. The longer I thought about it, the less funny it seemed. I sat up again, rubbing my face. Maybe I should check the news. I reached for my phone, pressed the button, but the screen stayed black, dead. I could have sworn it had been charging. I checked the cord, tugged at the plug. Everything looked fine. I pressed the button again harder, but nothing. That unease in my stomach grew heavier. I pushed myself out of bed and went to the window, lifting the blinds just a crack. The street outside looked ordinary, still under the pale orange wash of the street lamps. Cars lined the driveways, silent and still. The Reynolds house across the cul-de-sac glowed faintly with a blue light from their television. Nothing out of the ordinary. No kids, no movement. I almost convinced myself to laugh again, to crawl back into bed and call it a fluke. But then I heard it. Soft at first, so faint I thought maybe it was the wind, then clearer, giggling. The sound of children laughing somewhere close, carrying across the night air. My stomach flipped. I pressed closer to the blinds, squinting into the cul-de-sac. At first I saw nothing, just still lawns, empty driveways, then movement by the curb. 3 figures stood under the street lamp, small, thin, holding hands. My chest tightened. They were kids. At least they looked like kids. No shoes, no jackets, just standing there barefoot in the chill night, swaying side to side as if rocking to music only they could hear. I leaned in closer, trying to make sense of it. They were whispering something, though I could not hear the words through the glass. Every so often one of them would turn their head toward a house and tilt it too far, the neck bending at an angle that made me flinch. I pulled the blinds down quickly, heart hammering. Unauthorized children. The words made sense now in a way that made my skin crawl. I backed away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, running my hands over my face. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it was just kids from the neighborhood pulling a late-night prank. But who lets their kids out barefoot at midnight to stand in the middle of the street? I stood again, pacing the room, trying to shake the unease. The floor creaked under my bare feet, loud in the silence. I caught myself holding my breath, straining to hear through the walls. The giggling came again, closer this time, like they had moved further into the cul-de-sac. A light flicked on outside. I crept back to the window and peeked through another gap in the blinds. Across the street, the Wilsons' porch light burned bright, their front door opening just a crack. "Mr. Wilson poked his head out, squinting into the dark, his bathrobe hanging loose. I wanted to yell, to tell him to get back inside, but my throat locked. The children, or the things that looked like children, turned their heads in unison toward his house. The sight made my skin prickle, perfectly synchronized, no delay, no hesitation. They whispered something low, too quiet for me to catch. Mr. Wilson frowned and stepped onto the porch. I cursed under my breath and dropped the blinds again, pressing my back against the wall. The emergency alert had not been a mistake. I knew that now. Those were not kids out there. They could not be. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out every other sound. I sat there in the dark, trying to steady my breathing, trying to figure out what to do. Call the police? My phone was dead. Wake the neighbors? Risk opening the door? No. The alert had been clear. Do not engage. Do not respond. Minutes passed like hours. I stared at the door, half expecting a knock, half dreading it. The giggling had stopped. The silence outside pressed heavier than before. I could not bring myself to check the window again. I crawled back into bed eventually, pulling the blanket over my head like a child. Sleep never came. Every creak of the house, every sigh of the wind felt like it carried footsteps or whispers. I lay there, rigid and shivering, waiting for morning. When the first faint light touched the edges of the blinds, I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. The night was over. I told myself I had made it, but deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Because I had seen them, I had heard them, and whatever those children were, they did not belong here. I sat in bed with the blanket still pulled up around my shoulders, staring at the faint light leaking around the blinds. My body ached from being tensed all night, every muscle coiled as if waiting for something to reach through the window. The phone lay dead on the nightstand, its screen lifeless no matter how many times I pressed the button. For a moment I convinced myself that I could move on with my day like nothing had happened, that I could make coffee, brush my teeth, go through the motions. But then, the memory of that giggling outside came back, sharp as broken glass in my head. It had not sounded like kids playing. It had sounded practiced, performed. I forced myself out of bed and padded to the window, pulling the blinds a fraction. The cul-de-sac lay still in the pale morning. The Wilsons' porch light was off, their door shut tight. Every other house looked normal, cars and driveways, curtains drawn. The street itself was empty. No barefoot children, no swaying figures. For a few seconds I almost believed it had all been some grotesque dream, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I turned away and went downstairs. The kitchen smelled faintly of stale coffee grounds and dust. I filled the pot, my hands clumsy, spilling water across the counter. The simple sound of the machine sputtering comforted me, but only a little. My sister's bedroom door was still shut, and I told myself not to wake her yet. She was only 12, and I did not want to scare her with something I could not even explain. The first sip of coffee burned my tongue. I stood there at the counter, mug in hand, staring at the silent houses outside. Then the sound came again, faint, muffled, but unmistakable, giggling. My skin prickled. I set the mug down carefully and moved back to the living room window, crouching low so I would not be seen. I pulled the blinds apart just an inch. There they were again. 3 kids, barefoot, holding hands. They stood in the exact same spot in the cul-de-sac, under the same street lamp, though the morning had already risen around them. Their heads tilted side to side, rocking like puppets. Even from this distance, something about their proportions looked off. Their arms were too long, their necks bending too far each time they tilted. I held my breath, waiting, watching. One of them turned, its head jerking sharply toward the Reynolds house. The 3 of them leaned forward together, lips moving, whispering words I could not hear. The Reynolds porch light clicked on, The door creaked open. Mrs. Reynolds stepped out, tying her robe tighter as she frowned at the children. Her voice carried across the still air. "Are you kids lost?" My throat closed. I wanted to bang on the window, scream at her to get back inside, but I stayed frozen, palms pressed against the glass. The tallest of the 3 children looked up at her. Even at this distance, I saw it clearly. No whites in the eyes, just black, glossy voids that caught the light. A voice rose from that small mouth, too steady, too deliberate to belong to any child. "We're cold. Let us in." Mrs. Reynolds gasped, stumbling back into her doorway. Her hand flew to her mouth. She knew something was wrong. I could see it in the way she turned toward her husband, calling his name. But then he appeared, tall and broad, shoving past her. He squinted into the street and waved the children over like they were nothing more than strays. "Come on, kids. You can warm up in here." I shook my head violently, whispering no, 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 even though no one could hear me. The children moved then. They did not walk. They rushed, their bodies bent at impossible angles, knees snapping forward and back as they lunged across the yard in perfect sync. Before Mrs. Reynolds could scream, they were on him. The door slammed shut with a sound so loud it rattled my window. I crouched lower, heart hammering so hard I could taste blood in my mouth. A single scream tore through the air, sharp and raw. Then silence, the kind of silence that fills your ears and squeezes the air out of your lungs. I stayed there, crouched by the window, unable to move. Minutes dragged past. My legs went numb, but still I did not stand. The Reynolds house sat quiet, porch light still burning. No one came out, no one called for help. Finally, I backed away from the blinds, my body trembling. I stumbled to the couch and sat hard, clutching my knees. I whispered to myself that I had seen it wrong, that it had to be something else. But no amount of lies in my head could erase the image of those black eyes staring up at my neighbor. Upstairs, I heard the soft creak of a door. My sister's footsteps padded across the floor. Panic jolted through me. I scrambled up the stairs 2 at a time and caught her just as she reached the top step. She rubbed her eyes, hair tangled from sleep, blinking up at me. "What's going on?" I thought I heard someone outside. I grabbed her hand too hard, pulling her back toward her room. "Stay in here," I hissed, shutting the door behind us. She frowned, confused, but I could not bring myself to explain. How do you tell a 12-year-old that the emergency alert about unauthorized children had been real, that there were things outside wearing the shape of kids? I sat with her on the edge of her bed, forcing my breathing to slow. She kept asking questions, her voice low but insistent. I finally told her there were kids outside and that we had to stay inside until morning. She tilted her head the same way she used to when she thought I was lying. "Just kids?" she whispered. I nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yeah, just kids. But we do not open the door. Promise me." She chewed her lip, then finally nodded. I hugged her tight, my chest still heaving, my eyes burning. I told her to try to sleep a little longer, but I knew neither of us would. As I sat there in the dim glow of her nightlight, the sound came again, giggling. But this time it was closer, right outside the window. My sister stiffened, clutching my arm, eyes wide. The giggling rose and fell, a sound that should have been playful but twisted into something cold, something rehearsed. We did not move. We just sat there, frozen, listening as the whispers followed. Low words pressed against the glass, too soft to catch clearly but unmistakably aimed at us. My sister buried her face in my shoulder. I squeezed her tighter, staring at the shadows on the wall, praying they would pass us by. But deep down, I already knew they would not. This was only the beginning. The giggling outside the window would not stop. It rose and fell in waves, sometimes high and playful like kids chasing each other in a park, sometimes low and broken like the sound was being dragged out of them. My sister clung to my arm so tightly my skin burned under her grip. I wanted to pull her away from the window, to move her deeper into the house, but my legs refused to listen. I just sat there on the edge of her bed, listening, waiting, praying for the sound to fade. It didn't. A soft knock tapped against the glass, slow and deliberate. My sister stiffened, her breath hitching sharp against my chest. I turned my head, just enough to see the window from the corner of my eye. A small hand rested flat against the glass, fingers splayed too wide, too long for a child. Another hand slid up beside it, and then another. 3 hands pressed against the glass, all at once, leaving faint smudges in the condensation. I yanked the blinds down hard, cutting off the view, my heart hammering so fast it hurt. The giggling cut short, replaced by a silence that pressed into my ears like cotton stuffed inside. My sister whispered that we should call Mom, but Mom wasn't home. She worked overnight shifts at the hospital and would not be back until sunrise. The thought of trying to explain what was happening to her over the phone made me sick. She would think I had lost it. The silence stretched until I started to believe they had left. I eased my sister back under her blanket, told her to stay put, then slipped into the hall. I needed to check the windows downstairs to make sure the doors were locked. Halfway down the steps, I froze. Screaming. It came from outside, sharp and panicked, a man's voice tearing through the night. I bolted to the front window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. "Across the street, mister." Reynolds stood on his porch, waving his arms as he shouted at the 3 children in the cul-de-sac. Mrs. Reynolds stood behind him, her hand gripping the doorframe. Even from here I could see her pale face, the fear in her wide eyes. She tried to pull him back inside, but he shook her off. "Come on in, kids," he called, his voice trembling but loud. "You can warm up here." My stomach dropped. I wanted to scream at him, to run out and drag him back inside, but my body locked up. The children turned their heads in unison, all 3 pairs of black eyes snapping toward him. One of them spoke, voice flat, too deep for its small frame. "We're cold. Let us in." Mrs. Reynolds gasped, stumbling back into the doorway. But her husband had already stepped down onto the lawn, his hand outstretched like he was inviting them inside. The children moved. They didn't walk. They lunged forward in one sudden burst, their bodies bending wrong, arms snapping forward faster than my eyes could follow. The door slammed shut. For one moment the street was silent. Then it began, screaming, a sound so raw it curdled my stomach, high-pitched and desperate. Mrs. Reynolds, then Mr. Reynolds too, shouting, yelling, begging. The noise cut off so suddenly it was like someone had flipped a switch. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. My knees buckled. I slid down the wall, hands pressed over my ears, though there was nothing left to hear. My chest heaved, tears burning the corners of my eyes. Across the street, the porch light stayed on, the house quiet, the door still shut, but I knew. They were gone. Behind me, the stairs creaked. I turned, panicked, thinking the kids had gotten inside, but it was only my sister. She clutched her stuffed rabbit in one hand, her eyes wet with tears. "What happened?" she whispered. I couldn't answer, not truthfully. I just shook my head and told her to stay close. I guided her back up the stairs, locking us both in the bathroom this time. It was the only room with no windows. I stuffed towels under the door and turned on the tiny nightlight, its soft glow bouncing weakly off the tiles. We sat on the floor together, my sister leaning against me, clutching her toy so hard the seams stretched. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time twisted in the dark. Every sound made me flinch, every creak of the pipes, every sigh of the house settling. My sister asked over and over if Mom was coming home soon, and I kept telling her yes, even though I didn't believe it myself. Then the voices started. At first I thought it was the wind whistling under the eaves, but no, it was words. Whispered words, too close, pressed against the bathroom walls. My sister whimpered, pressing her hands over her ears. The whispers grew clearer, louder, until I recognized the voices, my own and hers. "Let us in," my voice said, calm and steady, just outside the door. "Let us in," my sister's voice echoed, higher, thinner, trembling like hers did when she was about to cry. We both froze. She shook her head violently, whispering, "That's not me. That's not me." I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight as the voices repeated the same words again and again, overlapping, growing louder. Then came another voice, my father's, warm and deep, the one I hadn't heard in 5 years since he died. "Sweetheart," it said, slow and careful, "open the door." My chest hollowed out. My throat burned as if someone had clamped it shut. My sister sobbed into my shirt, shaking her head over and over. "That's not him," she whispered, muffled against me. "That's not him." The voices continued, cycling through ours, through his, twisting them into something broken. "We're cold. Let us in. Open the door. Let us in." I wanted to scream, to shout at them to stop, but the words lodged in my throat. I pressed my forehead to my sister's hair, whispering to her instead, promising her I wouldn't open the door, that we would wait this out together. The voices went quiet all at once, the silence so sudden it rang in my ears. We sat there, listening, waiting for the next sound. My sister's sobs quieted to hiccups. I kept my arms around her, my own body trembling as badly as hers. Then came the scrape, a faint, deliberate dragging noise along the tile floor outside the bathroom. Something heavy being pulled. The sound moved slowly from one side of the door to the other, pausing, then dragging back again. I clutched the baseball bat tighter, my palms slick with sweat. My sister buried her face against me, refusing to look. The scrape stopped. The silence pressed in again. I don't know how long we sat there before exhaustion finally dragged us under. My body slumped against the wall. My sister curled tight against me, the nightlight casting weak shadows across the tile. When I jolted awake hours later, the house was silent. The voices were gone. The scraping had stopped. But the towels stuffed under the door were damp, soaked through with something dark that smelled faintly of earth and iron. And I knew then that this was not going to end with one night. Whatever those children were, they were not leaving until they got what they wanted. When I woke again, the nightlight had burned out, leaving the bathroom in complete darkness. For one panicked second, I thought the voices had returned, that the scraping was about to start up again, but all I heard was my sister's slow, uneven breathing where she slept curled against me. My back ached from the cold tile, and my legs were stiff, but I did not dare move too quickly. Every sound felt like it might carry beyond the bathroom door, and I could not risk drawing their attention back. I slid my hand toward the towels stuffed under the door. They were still damp, cold against my fingers. The smell clung sharp and metallic, like rusted iron left out in the rain. My stomach churned. I wanted to throw them away, but I could not bring myself to open the door, not yet. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining for any hint of movement outside. Nothing, just silence. For a moment I thought maybe the sun had finally risen, that the children had vanished with the night. I could not check my phone. It was still dead, the screen unresponsive no matter how hard I pressed. I thought about creeping upstairs to grab Mom's old clock radio, but the idea of stepping out of this one sealed room made my chest tighten. My sister stirred against me, groaning softly. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and blinked at the dark. "Why is it so quiet?" she whispered. I forced a smile she could not see and told her it was probably morning. We just needed to wait a little longer. She did not argue, but she did not look convinced either. She reached for my hand and held it tightly, her small fingers trembling. The silence stretched on, pressing into the room until I started to doubt myself. Was it morning, or had the world outside stopped altogether? The thought made my skin crawl. I knew we could not stay locked in the bathroom forever. I took a deep breath and told my sister I was going to check. She clutched my arm, begging me not to leave, but I promised her I would only open the door a crack, just enough to see. I pulled the towels away slowly, wincing at the squelch of damp fabric against tile. When I finally eased the lock open and cracked the door, the faintest sliver of light spilled inside. Not sunlight. Hall light, the weak yellow glow from the bulb at the top of the stairs. Relief loosened my chest. At least the house still had power. I opened the door wider and stepped into the hall, my sister glued to my back. The carpet felt damp under my bare feet, the same sour metallic smell lingering in the air. My stomach knotted. I forced myself not to look too closely at the stains. Not yet. We crept down the stairs together. Every board groaned too loud under our weight. I kept glancing at the windows, terrified I would see faces pressed against the glass. But the blinds were shut, curtains drawn, everything in place exactly as I had left it. In the kitchen, I flicked on the light. The fluorescent bulb buzzed before steadying. The room looked normal, almost insultingly so. Coffee pot on the counter, dishes in the sink, my half-finished mug still sitting where I had left it. My sister asked if it was over, if the kids had gone. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words stuck. I did not know. A sound cut through the silence, the buzz of the phone on the counter. My sister gasped, rushing to grab it, but I snatched it away first. The screen glowed red again with another emergency alert. My chest tightened as I read the words. Entities confirmed hostile. Appear as children. Possession occurs via physical contact. Victims become carriers within minutes. I read it out loud before I could stop myself. My sister's face went pale. She whispered that we had to stay away from the windows, that we could not let them touch us. I nodded, throat too tight to speak. Then the whispering started again, not outside this time, from the vents, low and layered, voices pouring through the air ducts like a broken radio tuned to too many channels at once. My sister clapped her hands over her ears, eyes wide with terror. I pressed her against me, whispering over and over that it was okay, that we were safe. But the words felt like lies as soon as they left my mouth. The voices grew clearer, sharper, until I recognized them. My sister's, mine, twisting, overlapping, repeating phrases that made no sense. We're cold. Let us in. We're cold. Let us in. My chest burned, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Then the lights flickered. The kitchen bulb dimmed to a sickly yellow, buzzed, then brightened again. The voices cut off instantly, leaving the house silent once more. I grabbed my sister's hand and pulled her into the living room. I dragged the couch against the front door, wedging it under the knob. My sister asked if that would stop them. I said yes, but my mind whispered no. If they could slide through vents, if they could mimic voices that perfectly, what would a locked door matter? We sat on the floor behind the couch, the phone clutched between us. I waited for another alert, some instruction that made sense, but the screen stayed dark. I thought about the Reynolds across the street, their porch light still glowing, their house too quiet. I thought about how quickly the screams had ended. My sister whispered that she missed Dad. I pulled her closer, my throat thick. I wanted to tell her I missed him too, that I heard him last night, and for a split second I almost believed it was really him. But I could not. If I told her, she might start listening for his voice too, and if she did, I was afraid she would answer. The hours dragged on. The silence pressed heavier with every passing minute, broken only by the occasional creak of the house. Each time, we both froze, waiting for the knock, the scrape, the whisper, but nothing came. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the phone buzzed in my lap. Another alert. The words chilled me to the bone. Entities confirmed to spread. They are not children. They are shells. Do not allow contact. Do not believe the voices. My sister read over my shoulder, her face pale, lips trembling. She asked what shells meant. I told her it meant they were empty, that they were just disguises. She did not speak again after that. She just leaned against me, silent tears streaking her cheeks. The night stretched on endlessly. The sun never came. The silence never broke. And I knew then that this was not a storm we could wait out. It was something else, something older, something hungrier, and it had already started spreading. The couch against the front door looked flimsy in the dim light, like a child's idea of a barricade. I sat with my back pressed against it anyway, gripping the baseball bat so tightly my knuckles were white. My sister sat beside me, legs pulled up to her chest, her stuffed rabbit clutched so hard the fabric strained at the seams. Neither of us had spoken for what felt like hours. The silence wasn't comforting. It was too heavy, the kind of silence that made you certain something was listening. I tried to distract myself by counting. I traced the grooves in the wood floor with my eyes, counting each one. I counted the seconds between the flickers of the light bulb above us. I counted my sister's breaths. Anything to keep my brain from circling back to the Reynolds across the street and the screaming that had stopped too suddenly. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps against the front door, so loud they rattled the frame. My sister gasped and buried her face in my arm. I held the bat higher, my chest tightening until I could barely breathe. The knock came again. Then a voice. It was my mother's voice, calm, tired, the way she always sounded when she got home from a night shift. "Sweetheart," she called softly through the door. "It's me. Let me in." My stomach flipped. She wasn't due home for hours. I knew that. I knew it. But the sound of her voice almost cracked me in two. I wanted to believe it, wanted to throw the couch aside and pull her into the house. My sister's wide eyes stopped me. She shook her head violently, mouthing the word "no" over and over. The voice grew sharper. "Open the door. Let me in." I gritted my teeth and pressed harder against the couch. My sister whimpered, the sound muffled against her rabbit. The voice repeated the words again and again, each time more clipped, more distorted, until the syllables stretched wrong, like a record playing at the wrong speed. Finally, it stopped. We sat frozen, waiting for the next sound. My sister lifted her head slowly, her face pale. "That wasn't Mom," she whispered. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The silence pressed in again, heavier than before. Then the scratching started. Nails, or something like nails, dragging along the windows, circling the house. Slow, deliberate scrapes that made my teeth ache. We flinched with every sound, clutching each other tighter. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to grab my sister, bolt out the back and take our chances in the woods beyond the cul-de-sac. But the alert had been clear. Do not approach. Do not engage. If those things could mimic voices this perfectly, if they could move the way I had seen, then stepping outside would be suicide. The baseball bat felt laughable in my hands, wood against whatever those things were. Still, I held it like it mattered, like it was the only thing tethering me to the idea of defense. Hours crawled by. My sister eventually dozed off against my side, her breathing shallow and uneven. I stayed awake, eyes fixed on the door, ears straining for the smallest sound. The scratching faded. The silence returned. I must have blinked too long, because when I opened my eyes again, the television in the corner was on. I hadn't touched it. My sister was still asleep. The screen showed static, gray and hissing. My stomach sank. Slowly, shapes formed in the snow. A hallway. Our hallway. The camera angle was wrong, like it was perched above the stairs, watching from the ceiling. I gripped the bat tighter, my chest hollow. On the screen, I watched myself. Sitting in the living room holding the bat, my sister beside me, but the image of me wasn't moving. It sat perfectly still, eyes open and smiling. My sister's image sat upright, smiling too, her rabbit limp in her hands. I shoved the remote under the couch days ago when the first strange things happened. The television should not have been on. I grabbed the power cord and yanked it from the wall. The screen flickered, but instead of going black, the image shifted. Now it showed the front porch. 3 children stood there holding hands, swaying side to side, their black eyes locked on the door. The bat clattered to the floor as my hands shook uncontrollably. I scrambled to cover my sister's eyes, but she had already woken and seen. She buried her face in my shirt, trembling so hard her whole body shook. The children raised their hands together, knocking in unison. The sound echoed through the room, both from the door itself and from the television. "Let us in," they whispered. The words hissed from the static, layered with dozens of other voices. Some I recognized, some I didn't. "We're cold. Let us in." I pressed my sister's head against my chest, whispering nonsense words to drown out the sound. "It's okay. It's okay. I've got you. I've got you." My voice shook so badly it barely sounded like me. Then the phone buzzed again on the floor between us. Another alert. I grabbed it with a shaking hand, desperate for direction. "He Jonah." The message burned into my eyes. "Do not follow voices. Do not leave shelter. If it calls your name, do not answer." As if on cue, the voices outside shifted. One by one they spoke my name. Clear, deliberate, each syllable dripping through the walls. My sister sobbed into my shirt. I bit down hard on my lip, tasting blood, forcing myself not to respond. The knocking grew harder, louder. The couch shuddered against my back, dust drifting from the frame. My heart hammered so loud I thought they would hear it. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The television blinked to black. The silence fell heavy again. My sister hiccuped quietly, her tears soaking my shirt. I rubbed her back, whispering empty reassurances until she calmed enough to breathe steady again. We stayed there until the air grew cold, until every sound in the house felt like it carried a weight I couldn't see. The hours stretched endlessly, no dawn breaking the horizon. And I knew then, clutching my sister in the glow of the dim bulb, that we weren't just hiding anymore. We were waiting for something older, hungrier, to decide it wanted us too. The house felt wrong in the hours that followed, like it was holding its breath. My sister had finally cried herself into a shallow, twitching sleep, her small body curled against mine on the floor. I kept my back pressed against the couch we had jammed against the front door, the baseball bat lying across my lap. I should have felt safer with the barrier in place, but the truth was, it made no difference. I knew if those things wanted in, a locked door and a couch would not stop them. I forced myself to stay awake, to keep listening, but exhaustion dragged at me until my eyes burned. Every time my head tipped forward, I startled awake again, sure I had heard a knock or a voice. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in the shadows of the room, a flicker just beyond the edges of the light bulb overhead, but when I blinked, it was gone. At some point, the phone buzzed again. The vibration rattled across the wood floor, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the bat. I snatched it up, my hands shaking, terrified of what it would say this time. The red screen glowed with another alert. "This is not a blackout. Entities are not children. They are shells. Avoid all contact. If compromised, carriers must not be trusted." Carriers. My throat went dry. I thought about the Reynolds house, about the way the children had rushed Mr. Reynolds, about the silence that followed. Carriers meant something worse than death. Carriers meant they were still here, still walking around looking like themselves. I pressed the phone against my forehead, whispering over and over that we were safe, that they had not touched us. My sister stirred at the sound of my voice. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy with sleep. "Is it over?" she asked softly. I could not lie fast enough. I nodded, told her we just had to stay quiet a little longer. She leaned her head against my chest, but I could feel her trembling. She knew I was not telling the truth. A faint hum filled the room then, low and electric, like the sound of power lines buzzing in summer. It came from the television. I had unplugged it hours ago, yet the screen flickered back to life. Static, then images. Not our hallway this time, not the porch. The feed showed the bathroom upstairs, the one we had hidden in. The door stood wide open. The towels I had shoved under the crack were gone. and in the corner of the room stood 3 children, facing the camera, heads tilted too far to one side. My sister whimpered, shoving her face into my shirt. I gripped her tight, forcing myself to keep watching. The children raised their hands in unison and pointed, not at the camera but straight down, toward where we sat in the living room. Then the feed cut to black. The humming stopped. The silence afterward was worse. My skin crawled. I grabbed my sister by the shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "We don't listen to them, no matter what we hear. You understand?" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I tried to think. I needed something solid, some plan beyond hiding. The phone buzzed again in my lap. Another alert. This one was shorter, colder. Avoid eye contact. Avoid touch. If they know your name, do not respond. As if the phone had summoned it, the knocking started on the back door. Slow, deliberate, 3 knocks spaced evenly apart. Then the voice came, my father's again. Strong, warm, achingly familiar. "Son," it called, muffled through the walls. "Open up." "It's me. Please." My chest ached so badly I wanted to scream. I shut my eyes tight, pressing my forehead to my sister's hair. She sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. The voice grew louder, sharper, each word dragging like claws. "Open the door." We didn't move. We didn't answer. The knocking stopped. Then footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps pacing the length of the house, circling, stopping at each window. I could picture them pressing their faces against the glass, black eyes unblinking, waiting for me to slip. At some point the footsteps stopped. The silence pressed heavier than before, like the air itself was thick. My sister whispered that she needed the bathroom. I wanted to say no, to tell her to hold it, but the look in her eyes told me she couldn't. I led her upstairs, bat in hand, every nerve screaming. The bathroom door was exactly as it had appeared on the television, open wide, towels gone. I shoved her inside, flipped on the light, and stood guard outside. My hand shook around the bat, every creak of the floorboards making me flinch. When she finally came out, pale and trembling, I shut the door tight again and hurried us back downstairs. The living room felt smaller when we returned, the shadows deeper. I dragged a lamp closer to the couch and twisted the knob until the bulb glowed bright. My sister curled against me again, her eyes fluttering shut almost immediately. She was too tired to stay awake. I stroked her hair, my jaw aching from how hard I clenched it. I must have dozed off too, because the sound that woke me was not footsteps or knocks but my own voice. It came from outside, clear and sharp through the front door. "It's safe now. Let me in." I froze, every muscle locking. The voice repeated, exactly the same, each word identical, as though it had been recorded and played back. My sister stirred against me, mumbling in her sleep. I clapped my hand over her mouth before she could speak, whispering for her not to answer. The voice went on, calling my name, demanding to be let inside. I kept my hand over her mouth until the sound faded. My chest heaved with shallow breaths, my heart rattling so loud I thought it would give us away. When silence finally returned, I dared to look at the phone again. Another alert glowed red on the screen. "This is not contained. This is not temporary. They are vessels. They are not leaving. Survive until dawn." But dawn never came. The hours stretched into nothing, the darkness outside thick and endless. My sister whimpered in her sleep, clutching her rabbit tighter. I held the bat across my knees, eyes fixed on the door, knowing we were running out of time. And in the quiet I realized something. The alerts had changed. At first they told us to wait for morning. Now they told us to survive until dawn. But what if dawn was never coming? What if that was the lie? The cruelest trick of all? I tightened my grip on the bat and whispered into the silence, not to my sister, not to the voices outside, but to myself. We do not open the door. We do not answer, no matter what. Because I understood then. This was not a single night to endure. This was the new world, and the only rule left was not to let them in. I woke with a start, my neck stiff from dozing upright against the couch. The lamp was still on, its glow weak and flickering, and my sister was curled against me, clutching her stuffed rabbit as if it were the only thing tethering her to safety. For a long moment I didn't move, just listened. The house was silent, not the heavy, suffocating silence of before, but something different, lighter, almost fragile. It was the first time in hours I felt I could breathe without hearing whispers ride on the air. I glanced at the phone, still clutched in my hand. The screen was black, dead again. I shook it, pressed the button. Nothing. My body ached from holding still so long. My stomach turned with hunger and fear. I nudged my sister gently, whispering that it was time to check if the morning had finally come. She stirred, blinking up at me with glassy eyes. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice small and cracked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I got to my feet, my legs shaky under me, and walked to the nearest window. The couch scraped against the floor as I pulled it aside. My hand hovered over the curtain, every instinct screaming not to look, but we couldn't stay shut inside forever. With a slow breath, I pulled the curtain back. The street outside looked different. The houses were still there, driveways lined with cars, but everything was bathed in a pale gray light that didn't feel like sunrise. It was as if the sky had given up on color altogether. No golden glow, no pink horizon, just flat light stretching across the cul-de-sac. The Reynolds porch light was still on, but their house looked wrong. The windows were too dark, as if the glass itself had been painted over. I stood there for a long time, staring, waiting for one of the children to appear, for those black eyes to snap toward me. But no one was outside. The cul-de-sac was empty. My sister pressed against my side, peering through the crack in the curtain. "Where are they?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, my throat dry. We moved room to room after that, opening curtains slowly, checking every window. Each one showed the same thing. Pale light, quiet streets, houses that looked like shells of themselves. No movement, no voices, no children. For the first time since the alert had gone off, I let myself hope. Maybe they were gone. Maybe we had survived long enough, followed the rules, and made it through. But when we checked the back door, my stomach dropped. The wood around the frame was warped, blackened, as if scorched by fire. The glass pane was smeared with handprints, long and distorted, pressed from the outside. My sister clutched my arm and asked what had done that. I told her not to worry, that it didn't matter anymore. I didn't tell her the truth, that the prints were on the inside too. We returned to the living room, sitting side by side on the couch, staring at the dead television. My sister asked if Mom would be home soon. I told her yes, though I had no idea if that was true. The phone hadn't buzzed in hours. No more alerts, no instructions, nothing. It was like the world beyond our cul-de-sac had gone silent. Finally, I decided we needed to know. I grabbed the bat and walked to the front door. My sister begged me not to, her small hands gripping the back of my shirt, but I told her I would just open it a crack. We couldn't hide forever. If this was really over, we needed to be sure. I pulled the couch aside and turned the lock. The click echoed too loud in the silence. Slowly, I eased the door open. The air outside was cold, heavier than it should have been for morning. I stepped out onto the porch, bat in hand, my sister hovering behind me. The cul-de-sac stretched quiet and still. Every car was in its driveway, every house in its place, but no people, not even the faint hum of life. Then I saw it. The Reynolds' front door was wide open. I could see straight through to their living room. The furniture was gone, the walls bare, as if the house had been hollowed out. My stomach tightened. I turned to the next house. Same thing. The walls stood, but the inside was stripped, empty, lifeless. We walked a few steps into the street, our footsteps echoing too loud. One by one, we saw that every house was the same, hollow shells. The neighbors were gone. Everything inside was gone. My sister clutched my hand, whispering that we should go back. I nodded, but before we could turn, the phone in my pocket buzzed. The sound nearly stopped my heart. I pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen glowed red once more. The message was short. Civilian casualties contained. Carriers relocated. Do not discuss unauthorized children. The words blurred as my vision swam. My sister asked what it said. I couldn't tell her. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, grabbed her hand tighter, and led her back inside. We shut the door and locked it again. I pushed the couch back into place. My sister curled up on the couch, hugging her rabbit, her eyes still wide. I sat beside her, staring at the blank television screen, my mind racing. The alert was final, cold, absolute. Whatever had happened to the Reynolds, to the other families, it wasn't coming undone. They were gone. Taken, changed, relocated, whatever that meant. And we had been spared, not because we were lucky, but because we had followed the rules, because we hadn't opened the door. The pale light outside never shifted, never brightened into true day. It stayed flat and gray, eternal. But we stopped waiting for the Sunday. Instead, we lit every lamp, every candle, every bulb in the house. We spoke in whispers. We ignored every knock, every scrape, every voice that followed. And in time, the giggling faded. The whispers grew weaker. The house became quiet again, not because the threat was gone, but because we no longer fed it. That night, as my sister finally fell into a deep sleep beside me, I sat awake, gripping the bat, staring into the glow of the lamp. I understood now. The world had changed. The children were never children. The rules were all we had, and so we would follow them. Do not approach. Do not respond. Do not open the door. Because surviving wasn't about fighting anymore. It was about refusing to let them in. And for the first time since the alerts began, that felt like enough. I hadn't talked to Craig since high school, and even then, talked was generous. He was more of a peripheral person in my life, a friend of a friend, someone who was always around but never central. We had a couple classes together, maybe a few mutual parties. I remember him mostly as that kid who laughed too loud, always had something to prove, and somehow knew everything about everyone. So when he messaged me out of nowhere, nearly 10 years later, I was surprised. It was one of those casual Facebook messages, the kind you glance at and almost ignore. Craig T. Hey man, I think we used to run in the same circles. You still in town? I didn't see any harm in replying. I had just moved back to my hometown after years away. Work fell through in the city, rent got ridiculous, and I figured coming back would give me a chance to regroup. I was between jobs doing some contract design work from home. Most of my old friends had moved on, or at least moved out, so I was open to reconnecting. We grabbed a beer that Friday, some dive bar off Main Street I hadn't been to since college. Craig was different than I remembered, or maybe just older. He still talked a lot, but now there was a weird kind of charm to it, like he'd been through things and come out with stories. He was intense, sure, but he was funny too. Charismatic in that way people are when they seem completely unfiltered. We talked for a few hours about jobs, relationships, old classmates, the usual surface level stuff. He said he was working in private logistics, which sounded vague, but I didn't push. He asked if I still saw anyone from back in the day. I told him no, not really. He nodded, grinned. Then I guess I'm your oldest friend now. It was a joke, but something about the way he said it stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, we started hanging out more. Nothing crazy bar meetups, backyard beers, occasional dinners when I felt like cooking and he didn't feel like eating alone. He always brought something, a six-pack, takeout, once even a bag of steaks he got cheap from a guy at work. I appreciated the company. Living alone, especially in a town that used to feel like home but didn't anymore, gets heavy fast. But after a while, I started noticing things. He'd show up unannounced. Not often, but just enough to be unsettling. Once on a Sunday morning, I opened the door in my boxers thinking it was a delivery and found Craig standing there, holding 2 coffees like we had plans. "Figured you'd be up," he said. "Didn't want these to go to waste." I hadn't heard from him in 2 days. Another time I came home from the grocery store and found him in my backyard, feet up on the patio table, smoking a cigarette. "I was in the area," he said, grinning like this was normal. And maybe it would have been if we were tighter friends, but we weren't. He started asking more personal questions too. What time I went to bed, if I still locked the windows upstairs, what I did when I couldn't sleep. I laughed some of them off, gave vague answers, but I was starting to feel observed. I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to assume anything. People drift in and out of your life all the time. Maybe he was lonely too. Then came the night he stayed over. We were drinking more than usual. He brought some whiskey he said he'd been saving, and we polished off most of the bottle between the 2 of us. I offered the couch. He accepted. Around 2 a.m., I crashed in my room. He was still up, watching something on TV. I heard the volume low through the wall. When I woke up the next morning, he was gone. At first, I thought nothing of it. The blanket was folded on the couch, the empty bottle left on the counter. But then I noticed my spare house keys. The ones I kept in the drawer near the front door were missing. I texted him, casually. Me. "Hey, good seeing you last night. You grabbed my spare keys by accident." Craig. "Nope, didn't even know you had those. Maybe check your coat pockets. I thought I saw you digging through them." I checked. They weren't there. I didn't press the issue. Maybe I misplaced them. But something in his reply felt rehearsed. That was a week ago. 3 nights later, around 3:15 a.m., I woke up to a sound. Not loud, not obvious. Just a shift in the air, a creak, something that pulled me from sleep with that cold, slow dread that wraps around your spine before you're even awake enough to understand it. I lay there in the dark, listening. Nothing. Then the next day, I decided to check my security camera footage. I'd set up a cheap indoor cam 6 months earlier, mostly because of porch pirates. It wasn't fancy motion alerts, cloud saves, night vision. One angle, straight from the bookshelf across the living room. I pulled it up on my laptop. There, at 3 a.m., motion triggered. I pressed play. The footage showed my front door slowly opening. Craig stepped inside. He didn't flick on the lights. Didn't hesitate. He just walked through the living room, slowly, scanning, looking around like he was taking inventory. He didn't touch anything. Didn't take anything. Just stood in the center of the room, hands in his jacket pockets. Then, after maybe a minute, he turned and walked back out. I watched the clip 3 times. Each time my heart pounded a little harder. I didn't remember dreaming anything that night. Didn't remember waking up, but he'd been there. In my house. While I slept. That was 3 days ago. I haven't heard from him since. And now, every night, I hear something. A door settling. A floorboard shifting. A whisper of air from a vent that suddenly feels like breath. Nothing in the house is out of place. Nothing is missing. But I swear, something's watching me. From inside. Since I watched the footage, I haven't been the same. I keep the lights on longer, double-check the windows, triple-check the doors, and still I don't sleep. That first night after seeing Craig on the camera, I sat in the living room with every lamp turned on, back to the wall, just watching. I didn't even realize I'd been holding a hammer in my hand until I dropped it out of sheer exhaustion around 4 in the morning. It's not that I'm afraid of him in the he might hurt me kind of way. At least, not yet. It's the not knowing what he wants, the intrusion. The fact that he walked into my house like he belonged there, not to steal, not to confront, just to be inside. Like he was inspecting something he already owned. The next morning, I texted him again. I kept it neutral. Me. Hey man, weird question. Did you stop by the other night? No response. 4 hours passed. Me. Craig? Still nothing. I stared at my phone all day. The text turned from delivered to read, and he never answered. By afternoon, I'd had enough. I called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation. A man entered my house without permission. Didn't take anything, but I had footage. I emailed it in while the officer on the phone took notes. His voice was calm, but I could tell he thought I was overreacting. Technically, if he had access to a key, and there are no signs of forced entry, it's murky. Still, someone will follow up. Do you know him well? No, that's the problem. Do you feel threatened? I paused. I don't know. I just feel watched. He told me someone would be in touch. That was it. The next night, I didn't wait to see if Craig would return. I left the house around 7 and checked into a cheap motel off the interstate. The kind where the front desk doesn't ask questions and the curtains don't quite reach the edges of the window. I used a fake name. Paid in cash. It felt paranoid, but the longer I sat in that room, the more I realized how far this had gotten under my skin. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the camera app again. Nothing new. I flipped back to the night Craig entered, pausing frame by frame. And that's when I saw it. In the background, barely visible, the hall closet door. It was open a crack when Craig walked in, closed when he left. I rewound, watched again. Open at 3 a.m. Closed at 3:05. But he never touched it. I watched his hands the whole time. They stayed in his pockets, never moved, not once. I rewound again. Open, then closed, and something else. The faintest flicker, maybe a shadow, maybe a trick of the grainy feed, but I could swear something moved behind that door. I didn't go back to the house the next day. I called in a locksmith, had the entire system replaced, all the doors, all the locks, even the garage. I wanted no trace of the old keys, no chance of access. I watched from my car as they worked. The locksmith didn't ask many questions, just gave me a receipt and told me to stay safe. Nice guy. But he looked at me a little too long, like maybe I was the problem. I didn't care. That night, I returned to the house, and I brought a friend. Ryan was an old co-worker from a job I'd had years ago. We'd stayed in touch, and I trusted him more than anyone else. He was practical, calm, and most importantly, believed me. We walked the whole house together, checking every door, every window, every closet. When we got to the hallway, I stopped in front of the closet. This is where I think something's wrong. Ryan opened it slowly. Just coats, old shoes, a box of wires. But I stared at the back wall. Something felt off. I leaned in and knocked. It sounded hollow. Ryan noticed too. Together, we pulled the coats out, moved the box. And that's when we saw it, a panel, not a door, not exactly. Just a thin rectangle of drywall, not quite flush with the rest. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. He looked at me. You want to open it? I didn't, but I nodded anyway. He used a screwdriver to pry the edge. It came away with a soft pop. Behind it, darkness. A crawl space, narrow, maybe 2 feet deep, running the length of the wall. Ryan shined his flashlight inside. And then we both stepped back at the same time. Inside were wrappers, empty water bottles, a blanket, a phone charger, and worst of all, a pair of socks. Mine. Ryan whispered, Jesus Christ, man. I didn't speak, couldn't. Someone had been living inside my house. Not just breaking in, staying, watching. The thought made my skin crawl. I backed away from the opening, bile rising in my throat. We called the police right then. They showed up within 20 minutes, took photos, bagged the items. They said they'd review prints, though warned that if he wore gloves, there might not be much to go on. One officer, an older guy with a tight jaw, pulled me aside. You said he was a friend? Someone you let into your house? I nodded. He sighed. That's how they get close. Make you feel like you're the one who's overreacting. But this guy, he crossed a line. I want to press charges, I said. If we can find him, you'll have your chance. He handed me a case number and promised to follow up. That was last night. Now I'm sitting on my couch again, staring at the hall closet. It's sealed, boarded, taped, locked. But I can still feel it, that presence, that watching. And when I checked my phone, new notification. Motion detected. Timestamp 3:12 a.m. This time the camera's facing the closet. And the footage? The panel shifts. Just a little. Just enough. After I watched the panel shift in the footage, just that half-inch tilt, like someone inside was pushing against it. I sat in the living room with every light on, my back to the front door and my eyes locked on the hallway. I held a crowbar in my lap. I don't know why I grabbed it instead of a bat or a kitchen knife. Maybe because it felt heavier, more permanent. I didn't call the cops right away. What would I even say? That I saw a board move? That I think someone is still in my house, maybe in the walls? I played the footage back again, slowed it down, frame by frame. At 3:11:47 a.m., the hallway was still. At 3:12:2, the panel lifted, maybe a few centimeters. A shadow shifted behind it. And by 3:12:15, it clicked back into place. No one came out. No one went in. And yet someone had moved it. Ryan called at 8 a.m., his voice groggy. "I couldn't sleep, man," he said. "That crawl space, I keep thinking about how small it is. You'd have to really want to be in there." "He was," I said. "I think he still is." Ryan paused. "You should get out." "I can't leave, not until I know." I couldn't explain it, not even to myself, but something in me refused to abandon the house. Maybe because the idea of leaving meant giving Craig power. Me fleeing my own life because he wouldn't stay out of it. That felt wrong, like surrendering. By noon, I'd made up my mind. I was going to open the panel myself. The police had bagged the stuff they found, taken their photos, and told me to seal it up for now, but they hadn't actually gone inside the crawl space. It wasn't technically large enough for an adult man to live in, they'd said. But then again, they hadn't seen the footage. I took the crowbar, a flashlight, and slid the panel off. The stale air hit me immediately dry, almost sour. I knelt down, shining the light inside. There was more space than I'd realized. The crawl space stretched farther than I thought. A narrow corridor that bent sharply to the left, just 10 feet in. I couldn't see past the turn. "Jesus," I whispered. I sat back on my heels, debating my next move. Then I heard something. A scrape. Soft. Deliberate. From inside. I backed up fast, heart hammering. I wasn't going in. Not alone. Not without knowing he wasn't armed. I called the cops again. 2 officers came, both younger, both looking like they'd drawn the short straw. They brought a dog, a 9 unit that sniffed around the opening, ears perked. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, just whined. The handler frowned. That's not good. They slid on gloves and shined flashlights into the space. "I'm not crawling in there," one said. The other nodded. "We'll need to call in search and recovery, or someone from structural." The delay killed me. They marked the opening with tape, made notes, asked me the same questions again when I'd seen Craig last, what he said, what he wore. I repeated everything, word for word. But I could tell they weren't treating it like an emergency. To them, he was just a guy who overstayed his welcome, not a stalker, not a threat. That night, I went back to the motel. Not because I was scared, because I was tired, and because I needed to think. I didn't tell Ryan I left. I didn't tell the police either. But at around 2:50 a.m., I got a notification. Motion detected. I tapped the feed, dreading what I'd see. The hallway was empty. Then, at 3:01 a.m., the panel slid open again. And this time Craig crawled out. Slowly, like he was stretching after a long nap. He stood up, brushed himself off, looked around, and then walked toward the kitchen. I fumbled to switch the feed to the other cam. He opened the fridge, drank straight from the orange juice carton, then shut it. He didn't touch anything else, just walked back to the hallway and disappeared through the panel again. I watched the whole thing unfold in real time. My breath caught in my throat. I was frozen, sitting on the edge of the motel bed, light from the phone casting long shadows against the wall. Craig was living in my house, coming out when he knew I was gone, making himself comfortable. He didn't want to steal anything. He wanted to belong. The next morning I took the footage to the station myself. I didn't bother calling. I walked in and demanded to see Harland, the lead officer assigned to the case. They brought him out after 15 minutes. He watched the clip with furrowed brows, expression hardening with every passing second. "All right," he said, "we'll issue a warrant. We'll sweep the whole property. If he's still there, we'll find him." Finally, they came in full force that afternoon, 2 cruisers, 3 officers, and a detective. They went through the crawl space with gear, gloves, headlamps. They found him, huddled behind the bend in the wall, curled in on himself like a spider in its web. He didn't fight, didn't scream, didn't even try to run. Just said, "I thought he wanted me here." They cuffed him and walked him out the front door. As they passed me, Craig turned his head, smiled. Not big, not sinister, just calm, like he knew something I didn't, like I'd let him in. I stared at him and said nothing. He disappeared into the cruiser without a word. It's been 2 weeks. The house is quiet now. Still, I replaced the panel with actual drywall, painted over it, moved a cabinet in front of it just in case. I sleep again most nights. Sometimes I still hear sounds, a creak here, a soft thump there, but I tell myself it's just the house settling. And when I check the cameras, nothing. But every now and then, I walk past the closet and think I hear breathing. Just on the other side. You'd think that after someone's arrested for squatting in your crawl space, someone you once shared beers and jokes with, you'd sleep better. You'd assume that everything clicks back into place once they're out of the house, out of your life. That's not what happened. The first 2 nights after Craig's arrest, I barely moved from the couch. I'd doze off with the TV on, jerk awake at every commercial break, heart racing for no reason. The 3rd night, I forced myself into bed and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. He was gone. The crawl space was sealed. The police had taken everything: his blanket, water bottles, the charger, even a small notepad they found with nonsense scribbled in red pen. Pages full of loops, names, symbols, numbers that didn't mean anything. Still, the detective said they'd keep it as evidence, said it might show intent. But the feeling he left behind didn't disappear with him. It lingered. I kept catching myself glancing at shadows, jumping at the sound of the fridge kicking on. I'd come out of the bathroom and pause, listening, not for anything specific, just listening. And always, always, that damn hallway closet. It had been boarded up, painted over, and pushed behind a heavy cabinet. There was no way in anymore, but still, I felt its presence. Like if I walked past too slowly, I'd hear breathing. Or worse, I'd feel someone holding theirs, waiting for me to pass. I told Ryan all of this over lunch. "You've got trauma," he said, tapping the side of his head. "What he did living in there, watching you, it sticks." "I get that," I said, "but it's more than just nerves. It's like he didn't leave, like there's a version of him still in the house." "You mean like a ghost?" Ryan said, half laughing. I gave him a look. "I'm serious," I said. He didn't laugh after that. The following day, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name, typed on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typewritten, neat. "I'm sorry I used the closet. I didn't know you'd find it so soon." No name. I sat at the kitchen table holding that paper with both hands, trying to understand what I was reading. I hadn't told anyone where I moved the cabinet. No one knew I covered the panel. And the police still had Craig in custody. I called Detective Harland immediately. "Has he been released?" "No," he said. "He's still being evaluated." "Evaluated?" "Psych hold. He's not cooperating, barely talking. We're waiting on the psych team's report." "Why?" I read the letter out loud. Harland went quiet. "We'll send someone to pick it up," he said. That night, I barely made it through a shower without yanking the curtain back every 30 seconds. The light flickered once in the hallway, and I damn near tore the breaker box open, convinced someone was in the basement. But again, nothing. 3 nights later, I heard my name. Whispered. Not loud, not panicked, just whispered. I was lying in bed, the covers pulled up, barely asleep when I heard it. "Hey." Then again, a little louder. "Hey, man, wake up." I sat up straight. Silence. I grabbed my phone, checked the camera app. No alerts. I got out of bed, barefoot, and made my way to the hallway. The air felt colder than usual, like a window had been left open. I checked. All shut, all locked. Then from the kitchen a click, like the sound of a light switch being flipped, only no light came on. I moved toward it, slow. The switch by the pantry was already up. I flicked it down, up, nothing. I backed away, heart pounding, feeling the weight of the house press in. That's when I noticed the front door. It was unlocked. Not wide open, just unlocked. I always locked it, always. I turned it slowly, locked it again, and stood there for a long minute trying to breathe. In the morning, I installed a second lock on the front door. Then I bought a motion-activated camera for inside the hallway, pointed directly at the closet. Even if I didn't believe in ghosts, I needed to see that nothing was coming in or out. I turned to old habits, coffee at all hours, late-night TV on mute, lights always on. The camera gave me some comfort at first. Then, On a Wednesday morning, I found a new notification. Motion detected. Hallway cam, 3:43 a.m. I sat down, opened the app, and played it. The timestamp appeared. Then the hallway empty, silent, bathed in that dim yellow light from the fixture overhead. At 3:43 and 21 seconds, something shifted. The cabinet. Just a tremble, a soft shudder. It moved forward less than an inch like someone had pushed from behind. Then it stopped. That was it. No one entered frame. Nothing came out. But the cabinet had moved. I checked it myself an hour later, measured the gap between it and the wall, took photos, compared it to the night before. It had definitely moved. That afternoon, I visited Craig. Not by choice. Detective Harland called, said Craig had asked to speak with me. He's lucid today, he said. Might help you close this out. Close it out. I hated that phrase, like it was something you could pack into a box, tape up, and move on from. I met Harland at the facility, a beige building with security glass and a smell that clung to your clothes. Craig sat across the table from me, wearing scrubs, no restraints. His hands were folded neatly on the table. He looked calm. Healthier even. "Hey," he said, "like we just run into each other at the grocery store. Thanks for coming." I didn't reply. He looked down at the table. "I know you probably hate me." Silence. He sighed. "I just didn't want to be alone. That's all. You were always kind, back in school, even when I was weird." "You broke into my home," I said. "I didn't take anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted to be there. You ever feel like you don't exist unless someone's watching you?" He said it like it made perfect sense. "I knew your routine," he continued. "I never meant to scare you." I leaned forward. "Did you send the letter?" He tilted his head. "What letter?" "The one that said you were sorry, about the closet." His eyes shifted, just for a second. "I've been in here," he said. "Haven't left." I stared at him. He smiled. Small, closed lip. That same expression from the hallway footage. "You sure I'm the only one you let in?" I left without another word. And that night, the hallway camera caught something new. A light flickering under the closet. Just for a second. A dim glow, then gone. Like a candle had been lit, then snuffed out. I didn't tell anyone about the candlelight. Not Ryan, not the cops, definitely not the detective who sat across from me while I tried to explain that something was still inside my house, something besides Craig. Because if it wasn't Craig and I was starting to believe it wasn't, then who the hell was it? Or worse, what? The next few nights were quiet in the literal sense. No motion alerts, no new sounds, no creaks or whispers or shuffling cabinet. But that was the problem. It was too quiet. I couldn't sleep in my room anymore. The hallway outside felt like it was holding its breath, like something waited just out of sight. I started camping out in the living room again, back on the couch where this whole thing began, the security feed always playing on a tablet next to me. The hallway camera stayed still, but I didn't trust stillness anymore. Stillness was waiting. Stillness was watching. I woke up around 4 in the morning on Friday, sweating. Not from a dream. I don't even think I was sleeping. My shirt was soaked. The kind of sweat that comes from dread, not heat. I sat up, rubbed my face, and glanced toward the kitchen. The hallway light was off. I never turned off the hallway light. I stood slowly, every hair on my arm standing up. My foot hit the floor too hard and made a dull thud that echoed more than it should have in a house that small. I looked down the hall. Darkness. I checked the camera feed on the tablet. Black screen. No signal. That was impossible. The camera was hardwired into the wall. I took a breath, held it, and walked toward the hall like someone stepping into water. Each step creaked. I reached for the light switch. Flipped it. Nothing. I backed up, slowly, one foot behind the other. And then something tapped from inside the wall. Once. Then silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I ripped the cabinet away from the wall. It hadn't moved, still flush against the baseboard, still blocking what used to be the crawl space entrance. The drywall patch I installed, still intact, but when I knocked on it gently, like someone approaching a wild animal, it sounded hollow again. Worse than before. I grabbed the claw end of the hammer and started chipping at the edges, pulling the drywall off in small pieces. And beneath it, the panel. Not the one I had installed. Not the one the police had sealed. The original. Like the wall had never been touched. I stumbled back, heart racing. This wasn't just paranoia. Something was undoing what I'd fixed. Something was maintaining the access. I called Ryan. He didn't pick up. I left a message that probably sounded half delirious, then drove to his place, pounding on the door until he opened it in a hoodie and jeans, blinking like he'd just woken up. "Jesus, man," he said, "you look like hell." "Come over," I said, "right now." He didn't ask questions, just grabbed his keys and followed me back. When we got inside, I showed him the wall. "How?" he whispered. "I don't know." "You sealed this. I watched you." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, then stepped forward and knocked. 3 sharp taps. Something knocked back. Not loud, not fast. Just enough. He jumped. "Okay," he said, backing up. "You need to leave this house. Not until I know what's in there. You're not thinking clearly. This isn't just Craig. This is, I don't even know." We stood there, breathing heavy, staring at the wall like it might open on its own. Ryan turned toward me. "If you open that panel, you better be ready to find something you can't put back." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat across from the hallway, crowbar in hand. At 2:57 a.m., the hallway light flicked on by itself. No click, no hum, just on. 3 minutes later, the panel slid open. Slowly, smoothly. No one came out, but the air changed. It felt thicker, harder to breathe. I stood, camera in one hand, flashlight in the other, I stepped closer, shined the light inside. The crawl space looked deeper than it had before. Longer, wider, like it had grown. I stepped back. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft, childlike, whispering. "I don't like it in here." I froze. It wasn't Craig. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was a girl. I turned and ran to my phone, dialing Harlan directly. Voicemail. I didn't leave one. I called Ryan. Straight to voicemail. I stood in my living room, shaking, unsure if I was still awake. Then I heard the voice again, closer. "Why did you stop looking?" The police arrived at 7:00 a.m. They found me in the hallway, sitting against the wall, the panel wide open beside me. I hadn't moved in hours. I told them everything. Again, the voices, the wall changing, the panel reappearing. They said it was stress, sleep deprivation. They told me Craig's evaluation had come back. He wasn't considered a threat. He was being released under supervision. I laughed when they said that. I asked them to look in the crawl space again. They did. And this time, they found something. A small red hair bow, tangled in the insulation. It didn't belong to me. It didn't belong to Craig. It was old, faded. And when they took it in, they ran it against a local missing persons database. They matched it to a girl named Lily Kearns, reported missing in 2002, 12 years old. Last seen at this address. Before I ever moved in, before Craig ever squatted in the walls, before I ever met him. And just like that, the story changed. This wasn't Craig's obsession. This was someone else's house. And I had walked into it, uninvited. The day they confirmed the bow belonged to Lily Kearns was the day the house finally made sense. Or maybe not sense, maybe just context. You don't live in a place like that and come out of it feeling sane. But at least now I knew I hadn't been imagining everything. The crawl space, the voice, the feeling of being watched from within my own walls. There was a history here, and I had stepped into it blindly. They reopened her case. Turns out Lily Kearns had gone missing from this very house over 20 years ago. She'd been in foster care placed with a couple who'd vanished shortly after she did. No one had connected the house back then, not after it was flipped and sold a few years later. No one remembered, or maybe no one wanted to. The bow was enough to shake things loose. They sent a cadaver dog into the crawl space the next week. And that's when they found her. Not just her remains, but the toys, the blanket, a name carved into the wood. Lily, etched by a child's hand into the back wall. They never found the foster parents. And as for Craig, he hadn't known about her. When they showed him the pictures, the carving, the bow, he broke down. They said he wept like a child, said he never saw her, never heard her, said he only chose that crawl space because it felt safe, familiar, like someone was protecting him. Harlan told me that part. I didn't respond. The house sat empty for 2 weeks. I stayed with Ryan, sleeping on his couch, drifting between exhaustion and something worse. Not quite paranoia, more like residual dread. Like even though the danger had passed, my body hadn't gotten the memo. The closet stayed boarded, the cabinet untouched, but I couldn't stop thinking about that voice, the one that whispered to me, "Why did you stop looking?" I hadn't told anyone about that, not even Ryan, because part of me knew it wasn't something I could explain. It wasn't just a memory or a hallucination or a leftover echo from trauma. It was real. She was real. A girl who had been trapped, forgotten, hidden so deeply that even when someone lived right above her, they didn't know she was there. And somehow, I think she forgave me. Or maybe she just wanted me to finish it. I went back to the house the following weekend. Alone. Ryan offered to come with me, but I needed to face it without a buffer. I needed to look it in the eye and prove it didn't control me anymore. The locks had been changed. Again, standard procedure. There were still police markers on the doorframe, warning tape on the crawlspace wall, but no one was watching anymore. I walked the house in silence. Kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, all untouched. Then the hallway. The panel was still open. I sat down in front of it, legs crossed like I was waiting for a confession. There was nothing inside now. No drafts, no breathing. Just stillness. But it felt different. Less like waiting. More like resting. I pulled out a small box I'd brought with me. Inside was a new hair bow, not an exact replica, but close, red velvet. Neat little knot. I'd found it at a second-hand shop and knew it had to come here. I crawled inside, just far enough to reach the corner. And I left it there. No cameras, no photos. Just a gesture, an acknowledgement. You were here, you mattered. I backed out slowly and sealed the panel myself, with screws this time, then covered it with drywall, sanded it, painted over it. No more access, no more hiding places. 2 months later, I sold the house. Didn't make a profit, didn't care. The buyers were a retired couple, sweet people. They didn't ask many questions. The real estate agent kept it light, focused on the updated appliances and big backyard. No one mentioned Lily, and I didn't offer. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because it wasn't mine to share anymore. She was found. That part was over. I moved to a small apartment near the edge of town. Nothing special, just a clean, quiet space with no crawl spaces, no closets near the hallway, and no drafty walls. It took me a while to sleep without checking the cameras every hour. Took even longer to shower without leaving the bathroom door open. But time passed, and the tension eased. Craig was transferred to a long-term facility. He writes me letters sometimes once a month, always the same tone. Friendly, measured. He signs them "your friend," like nothing ever really went wrong. I never write back. I don't hate him, but I don't want him in my life. Some people are shadows, even when they're standing in the light. One morning, I got a call from Detective Harland. He was brief, as always. They finished the crawl space inspection, he said. Turns out it was a retrofit, part of an old bomb shelter built in the 60s. Must have been hidden for decades. Explains the size, I said. Explains how she went unnoticed too, he added. Hell of a thing. We didn't talk much after that. I think he wanted to say more, but didn't know how. So I thanked him and hung up. It's been almost a year now. I still think about her. Not Craig, not the house. Her. Lily. Sometimes I wonder what she saw in those final moments, what she thought about, whether she believed anyone would come for her. And sometimes I think about that voice in the night. Why did you stop looking? And I say quietly, when no one else is around, I didn't. I found you. That's what matters in the end. Not how it started, not even how it ended, but that the silence was broken, that someone listened, that someone cared. She's not in the walls anymore. She's free, and so am I. It started with that horrible sound from my phone, the emergency alert tone that feels like it shakes something inside your chest. I came out of sleep in a jolt, heart hammering, and reached blindly for the phone on my nightstand. The screen lit the room in red. I squinted at the words, not even sure I was awake at first. Do not answer knocks at your door. They are not police. Stay inside. Do not engage. For a few long seconds I just stared at it, my head heavy with the kind of fog you only have when you wake up too suddenly. The words did not fit together right. I thought maybe it was some kind of glitch, one of those mistaken alerts that sometimes make the news, like when they say a missile is incoming by accident. But as soon as I thought that, I heard it. 3 sharp knocks from downstairs, hollow and precise, echoing through the wood. I froze where I was in bed, sheets tangled around my legs. My first thought was maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the alert had nothing to do with the sound, but my chest tightened and I could feel each beat of my heart thudding in my throat. I held my breath, straining to listen, my eyes darting around the dark room. Nothing followed, just silence. The air in the house felt heavier, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every small sound. I could hear the refrigerator downstairs humming faintly, and the tick of the hallway clock. My own breath sounded too loud. I wanted to believe it was some random late-night visitor, but the alert sat burning in my head. Do not answer knocks at your door. They are not police. I swung my legs out of bed and stood slowly, my body trembling in ways I could not control. I padded over to the window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. The street outside was still, dimly lit by a single street lamp that flickered every few seconds. And there it was, sitting right in front of my house. A police cruiser, idling silently, headlights dimmed but running lights on. For a moment my fear melted into confusion. Why would there be an alert telling us not to trust police if a cruiser was right there? Maybe it was a real officer checking on people. Maybe there had been break-ins and they were warning us about imposters. But the message had been clear. They are not police. I looked down at the porch and saw the man standing there. He looked the part completely. Dark uniform, reflective patches, a badge that glinted under the porch light, and a flashlight held loosely in one hand. His posture was steady, calm, the way you would expect from an officer doing a routine check. But something about the way he stood was off. He was too still, like he was waiting for a cue. And every few seconds he tilted his head slightly to the side, the motion sharp and unnatural, like he was listening for something I could not hear. Then, as if he had sensed me, he lifted his chin and looked straight up at my window. My stomach dropped like I had been yanked off a ledge. His eyes found mine in the dark even though I had not made a sound and the curtain had barely moved. It felt impossible, like he had been waiting for me to appear. My first instinct was to duck away, but I was frozen there, breath locked in my throat, skin prickling with cold sweat. The porch light buzzed once and dimmed, just for a second, and in that moment, I thought I saw his face flicker too. Not change exactly, but ripple, like a reflection in disturbed water. It was gone before I could blink, and when the light steadied, he was just standing there again, perfectly dressed, perfectly still. The silence dragged on, stretching the moment into something unbearable. I finally backed away from the window, pulling the curtain closed with shaking hands. My legs felt weak, the floor cold under my bare feet. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone, still glowing red on the nightstand. Do not answer knocks. Do not engage. The words looped in my head like a broken record. Another knock came, slower this time, heavier. The sound rattled up the stairs and through my ribs. I flinched hard enough that my teeth clacked. Then came the voice. It carried clearly through the door and up the stairwell. Police, open up. The tone was flat, too drawn out, like a bad recording played through cheap speakers. Every instinct in me screamed that it was wrong. Real police announce themselves in sharp, clipped voices. They sound urgent, commanding. This was none of that. This was a word stretched too long, echoing with a strange warble like it did not quite fit in a human throat. I wanted to run to my sister's room down the hall, to make sure she was awake, to tell her not to go near the door, but my legs would not move. I sat there in the dark, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles ached, listening to the sound of that voice repeating the same words again. Police, open up. The cruiser outside idled with no sound of an engine. The man on the porch did not move, he only waited. And I understood then that the alert had not been an accident. It had been for us. Whatever was outside the door was not here to help, and if I opened it, I would not come back inside. The clock in the hall ticked once, twice. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the door in its frame. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. I sat perfectly still, every muscle tight, the words of the alert echoing louder in my head than the knocking itself. Do not answer. They are not police. Do not engage. And in that moment, I believed it with everything I had. I sat on the edge of my bed, gripping the phone until my hands hurt. The red glow had finally faded, but the words of the alert were burned into my eyes. I could still see them every time I blinked. Do not answer knocks. They are not police. Stay inside. Do not engage. The voice downstairs repeated again, low and flat. Police, open the door. Each word stretched too long, like someone unfamiliar with speech was trying to mimic the sound of it. I slid off the bed and moved quietly into the hallway, careful not to let the floorboards creak. My sister's room was just across from mine, her door shut. I wanted to wake her, to pull her into my room and hide, but I did not know how to explain without her panicking. Another knock shook the front door, 3 hollow raps that sent vibrations through the floor beneath my feet. She stirred inside her room. I heard her bed creak, and I whispered her name softly, urging her not to open the door if she heard anything. I pressed my ear against the wood and whispered again, firmer this time. I think she heard me because she did not respond, just quieted down. I turned back toward the stairs and crept down a few steps until I had a view of the entryway. The frosted glass of the front door glowed faintly with the porch light behind it. A silhouette stood there, a broad figure in what looked like a uniform. The beam of his flashlight cut across the door, flashing once, then going still. He did not fidget or shift weight like a person would. He just stood perfectly still, shoulders square, head tilted slightly to the side as though he was listening to the house breathe. My pulse roared in my ears. Every instinct told me to run back upstairs, but I could not tear my eyes away from the figure. The knock came again, softer this time, almost polite, and the voice followed. Police, open the door. It was the same warped cadence as before. It sounded close but distant at the same time, like it was coming through a tunnel. I forced myself to move back upstairs, my hands trembling on the banister. I went into my room and pulled the curtain back just enough to look down at the cruiser in the street. The car idled in the same place, headlights low, but when I focused on it, I noticed details that made my stomach tighten. The license plate had no numbers, just a blank metal rectangle glinting under the streetlight. The reflective stripes along the doors looked printed on, like decals instead of paint, and the engine was silent. No rumble, no exhaust, just stillness. The man on the porch tilted his head again, sharper this time, until it looked unnatural, his ear almost touching his shoulder. Then, without warning, he snapped his face up toward my window again. His eyes found me instantly, even through the darkness and the narrow slit in the curtain. I stumbled back, letting the fabric fall shut, my breath catching hard in my chest. How could he see me? I had not moved the curtain enough to make a sound. I pressed myself against the wall, heart racing, hands clammy against the plaster. I wanted to call the police, the real police, but what if the line connected me to the same voice outside? What if whoever had sent the alert was the only real authority left? The thought made my head spin. Another knock echoed through the house, harder now, rattling the glass in the frame. "Police, open the door." The words were louder, but the same wrong cadence, too slow and too flat. The repetition scraped against my nerves. I knew real officers would announce themselves differently, call out with urgency, maybe shout our names. This voice sounded like someone practicing from a script and not doing it well. Across the street, movement caught my eye through the slit of curtain. Mr. Carlson's porch light flicked on. The old man shuffled out in his robe, muttering as he opened his door a crack. The figure on his porch looked identical to the one outside mine. Same uniform, same flashlight, same stillness. My chest tightened as I watched Mr. Carlson peer out, confused but unafraid. He probably thought he was helping, or that there had been a disturbance in the neighborhood. I wanted to scream for him to shut the door, to run, but I could not make a sound. My throat locked up as the uniformed figure stepped forward, pushing the door open wider with one hand. Carlson seemed to protest, his arms rising, but the officer moved past him into the house. I held my breath, waiting for something normal to happen, some explanation. Instead, after a long minute of silence, a scream tore through the night. It was the kind of sound that freezes your blood, raw, desperate, and cut short all at once. Carlson's voice, broken in terror, ended as suddenly as it began. My whole body went rigid. I clamped a hand over my sister's door so she would not open it, though she had not even tried. I stood there trembling, listening as the officer stepped back onto the porch. Through the curtain, I watched him walk calmly down the steps. His hands glinted wet in the porch light. He raised one to his chest and wiped it across the dark fabric of his uniform, smearing something that looked too dark to be water. Then he turned, and even though I was hidden behind the curtain, I felt him looking directly at my window again. I stumbled back, my legs weak, the room tilting around me. The cruiser outside shifted in the street, headlights dimming for a moment before steadying again. I counted my breaths, each one sharp and shallow, trying not to make noise. My mind raced with explanations, but none of them fit. Whatever that thing was, it was not a police officer, and it had just walked out of Carlson's house alone. The knock came again downstairs, 3 sharp raps, then the voice. "Police, open the door." It was louder now, stronger, as though it knew I had seen too much. My skin crawled, every nerve screaming at me to hide. I backed into my sister's room, shutting the door softly behind me. She sat upright in bed, eyes wide, clutching her blanket. "What's happening?" she whispered. I knelt beside her, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Do not make a sound. Do not open your door for anyone." She nodded quickly, tears brimming in her eyes. I hugged her tightly, listening as the knock echoed again through the house, followed by that wrong, drawn-out voice repeating the same words over and over. "Police, open the door." I held her close, the truth solid in my chest now. Whatever was outside, it was not here to protect us, and the alert had not been a mistake. The knocking had stopped for a while, though the silence it left behind felt worse. I sat on the floor beside my sister's bed, listening for the smallest sound, afraid even my breathing was too loud. Every board in the house seemed to creak more than usual, and the hum of the refrigerator downstairs might as well have been a siren. I pressed my ear against the floor, trying to hear if the figure on the porch had left, but there was nothing, just the faint buzz of the porch light through the wood. I thought maybe it had moved on, maybe whatever it was had given up, but when I peeked through the curtain of my room again, the cruiser was still there. It sat in the middle of the street with its lights faintly glowing, but the engine gave off no sound, no plume of exhaust in the cold air. The man in uniform was gone from my porch, but I knew he was not far. My body tensed with that animal sense you cannot explain, the certainty of being watched. Across the street, Mr. Carlson's door still hung half open, his porch light shining into an empty hallway. I could not see him, could not hear him, and the scream I had heard earlier replayed in my mind like a stuck record. The figure that had gone inside came back out again, as though nothing had happened, wiping its hands on its uniform like it had just finished a chore. My stomach twisted. I wanted to call the police, the real police, but every time I reached for my phone, the warning replayed in my head. They are not police. What if the line connected me to one of them? What if they were already on the other end, waiting for me to reach out? At 1:30, headlights flickered further down the street. Another cruiser rolled in, then another, and another. They pulled up silently, one after another, until 4 of them lined the road. Each was identical to the one already parked. Same blank license plates, same painted stripes that seemed too flat. The red and blue lights spun faintly, casting flashes across the neighborhood, but there were no sirens. No sound but the faint hum of the bulbs inside my house. The figures stepped out of the cruisers in unison. 4, then 6, then 8. Each wore the same uniform, the same polished shoes, the same belt. At first glance, they looked convincing, but the longer I stared, the more the details pulled apart. Their smiles looked printed, stretched too evenly across their faces. Their cheeks were too smooth, no stubble, no lines, like mannequins, and every few steps, their heads would tilt sharply, as if listening to some signal none of us could hear. I whispered for my sister to stay put and crept back toward the stairs, crouching low so the windows would not show my silhouette. The knock came again, this time from the neighbor's house 2 doors down. I peeked through the blinds and watched as one of the figures stepped onto the porch. It raised its hand and rapped 3 times, precise, each knock spaced exactly the same. Then it spoke. "Police, open the door." The words dragged too long, stretched and heavy. The voice sounded as though it had been recorded badly and played through old speakers. My neighbor cracked his blinds to peek, just as I had done, and the figure snapped its head toward the window immediately, eyes locking onto him. My neighbor jerked back, and the blinds fell shut. The figure tilted its head again, then repeated the same line. "Police, open the door." I crouched lower, pressing myself against the wall, pulse slamming in my ears. My sister padded softly down the hallway behind me, her small hand grabbing my arm. I wanted to yell at her to go back, but the fear in her eyes stopped me. She whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "They sound wrong." I nodded slowly. She had heard it too. Minutes stretched like hours. We sat frozen, listening as the knocks moved from house to house. Always 3 raps, always the same line. Some people resisted, some stayed silent, but eventually someone else gave in. A door creaked open halfway down the street. I pressed my eye to the crack in the blinds and watched as another neighbor, half-dressed in pajamas, stepped outside with confusion written all over his face. He gestured with his hands, talking fast, probably asking what was going on. The officer stepped closer. The man's words grew louder, sharper, but I could not make them out through the glass. Suddenly, the figure's arm snapped forward, far too fast, far too sharp, grabbing the man by the shoulder. His body stiffened instantly. His mouth opened in a scream that never finished, cut short as the figure yanked him into the dark between houses. His slippers clattered against the porch as they dragged him out of sight. The air seemed to fold around them, and then it was silent again. My sister buried her face into my sleeve to stifle a sob. I pulled her close, whispering that we had to stay quiet no matter what. My own body shook so badly, I could hardly keep the curtain closed. The figures began spreading out, 2 by 2, moving in perfect sync. They crossed lawns without hesitation, their flashlights cutting deliberate lines through the dark. None of them spoke unless they were at a door, and when they did, the voice was always the same. Police. Open the door. Slow. Warped. Wrong. I ducked low and pulled my sister with me into the hallway. I knew it was only a matter of time before they came back to our house. We had been lucky the first time, when I had not answered, but would they try again? Would they wait us out? The air in the house felt too thin. Every bulb buzzed louder, the hum filling my skull. I dragged my sister into my room and locked the door, though I knew it would not stop anything. We huddled by the bed, the phone clutched in my hand, waiting for another alert, for something that told us what to do next. At 1:45, the knock returned. 3 sharp raps against the front door. Then the voice, deeper this time, as though pushing harder. Police. Open the door. The words vibrated through the floorboards. My sister whimpered, and I clamped a hand gently over her mouth, whispering for her to stay quiet. The knock came again, harder, rattling the glass. Police. Open the door. Every light in the house flickered at once. For a moment, the shadows in the corners stretched too far, bending wrong. I held my breath, waiting for the bulbs to steady. When they did, the silence returned. The figure on the porch did not leave. It just stood there, waiting. I realized then that the emergency alert had not been exaggerating. It had not been a test or a glitch. These things were moving through our neighborhood, one house at a time, and no one who opened the door came back out. I sat there in the dark, holding my sister against me, and made myself a promise. No matter how long they knocked, no matter what voices they tried to use, I would not open the door. I would not let them in. The silence between the knocks was worse than the knocks themselves. Every time the sound stopped, I sat there holding my sister's hand, waiting for the next one, counting the seconds in my head. Sometimes it came back after only a few moments. Sometimes minutes passed before the hollow thud of knuckles on wood rattled the frame again. Each time it happened, the same voice followed, slow and stretched. Police, open the door. By 2 a.m, more cruisers had arrived. I stopped counting after 6. They lined the street like a parade, red and blue lights spinning silently, painting the houses in sickly colors. No sirens, no sound of engines, just those lights pulsing against the dark. Figures moved between them, dozens of them, all wearing the same pressed uniforms, all with the same too smooth faces and stiff, tilting heads. They moved together in groups, like actors following a choreographed routine. None of them ever spoke unless they were knocking. I pulled my sister back into my room and closed the door softly. She was shaking so badly I could feel it through her hand. Her face pressed into my sleeve, and she whispered that she had heard Mom's voice downstairs. She swore it had called her name from the front hallway. My blood went cold. Mom had been gone for years, and yet I believed her. The way these things mimicked voices, it was not impossible. I whispered back that it was not real, that she must not listen no matter what. She nodded quickly, but her eyes darted to the dark corners of the room, wide with terror. The knocks outside shifted further down the street. More neighbors gave in. I heard a door slam, voices rise, then the inevitable scream cut short. After each one, the silence thickened until the next knock began. It was like the entire neighborhood was being emptied house by house. I pressed my forehead against the cool wall, fighting to breathe quietly. At 2:15, another alert screamed through my phone, the red glow stabbing into the room. My sister flinched and begged me not to read it, but I had to. I lifted it slowly, hands slick with sweat, and read the words aloud in a whisper. They mimic authority. Do not believe them. Do not answer. Survive until dawn. Survive until dawn. The words hit me harder than the rest. That meant this had a time limit, that maybe if we just made it through the night, the danger would pass. But then doubt slid in, heavy and sharp. What if dawn never came? What if this was not something you could outwait? I shoved the phone under the mattress, unable to look at it anymore. The figures moved closer again. I could hear their synchronized footsteps crunching across lawns, gravel popping beneath their shoes. Their flashlights cut deliberate beams across windows. When one swung past mine, I ducked to the floor and pulled my sister down with me. The beam slid across the curtain, paused, then moved on. My throat tightened, but I stayed perfectly still. At 2:30, I made the decision to get us to the basement. The second floor felt too exposed, too easy for those beams to catch us through the windows. I whispered to my sister to grab her blanket and one of the flashlights. She nodded quickly, clutching both to her chest, and we crept into the hallway. The house groaned faintly under our weight, every creak of the floorboards like a gunshot in the silence. Downstairs, the frosted glass of the front door glowed faintly with the porch light. The silhouette was still there, unmoving, its head tilted sharply again, listening. I pulled my sister toward the kitchen, away from the front door, and eased open the door to the basement stairs. The hinges groaned, and I froze, holding my breath. The knocking stopped. My stomach clenched. Then, from the front door, the voice rose again. "Police, open the door." It was louder now, heavier, as though it was pushing through the walls themselves. My sister whimpered, but I pressed a hand over her mouth and pulled her into the basement, closing the door softly behind us. The basement was colder, the air damp and heavy with the smell of earth. I flipped the switch, and a single bulb hummed to life, casting a weak yellow glow over the concrete floor. We moved quickly, pulling old boxes and a broken chair against the door. I shoved the couch from the basement rec room up against it as well, grunting with effort until it wedged into place. My sister crouched in the corner, flashlight aimed at the door, her small body trembling under the blanket. The knocking started again almost immediately, right above us, rattling the doorframe. The voice followed, deeper and slower than before. "Police, open the door." The wood shook with each hit, dust falling from the ceiling. I pressed my back against the couch, my hands gripping the edge, ready to push harder if the door gave way. The house settled back into silence, but it was not the same silence as before. I could hear them outside now, circling the house, their synchronized footsteps crunching across the gravel and grass. Once in a while, a beam of light cut across the basement windows, making the dust in the air shimmer. Each time it passed, my sister flinched, whispering that they were going to see us, that they already knew we were down here. I held her hand tight, whispering back that we had to stay quiet, that silence was the only shield we had left. At 2:45, the porch light outside buzzed and flickered. Through the basement window, I saw the glow dim, then return, then dim again. When it weakened, the figures pressed closer. Their outlines blurred at the edges, their faces stretching unnaturally in the faint glow. When the light steadied, they froze in place, as if caught mid-motion. I understood then that the light did not stop them, it only slowed them, like shadows shrinking under the sun. But the porch light was old, and it would not hold forever. My sister whispered that she could hear them whispering now, not just the words, "Police, open the door," but other voices, softer, sliding through the walls. She said one of them was Mom's voice again, calling her name, begging her to open up. I told her it was not real, but her eyes filled with tears. She covered her ears and rocked back and forth, mouthing the same words over and over. "Do not answer. Do not answer." The basement bulb flickered once, and the room plunged into darkness for a heartbeat. In that second, I swear I saw something move across the floor, a shape too tall to belong in the room, bending down to fit under the ceiling. When the bulb came back, the space was empty again, but my chest felt tight, as if the air had been sucked out. By 3 o'clock, the neighborhood outside had gone nearly silent. No more screams, no more doors slamming. Just the occasional synchronized footsteps of the figures circling the houses, waiting. The emergency alert had told us to survive until dawn, but sitting in that basement, surrounded by flickering light and walls that seemed too thin, dawn felt impossibly far away. I sat with my back against the couch, holding my sister's hand in the glow of the trembling bulb, and realized something I had been avoiding all night. This was not about waiting out a storm or a power outage. This was something else entirely, something that had already taken the neighborhood and was now pressing against our walls. And the only thing between us and them was the thinnest thread of light. The bulb above us buzzed faintly, its glow already too weak for comfort. My sister sat huddled against the basement wall, clutching her blanket so tight the fabric was twisted into knots. The flashlight rested on her knees, The beam pointed at the couch we had shoved against the door. Her eyes never left that spot. I could not blame her. Every so often the wood shuddered with a hollow thud, like something brushing against it, testing our barricade. I forced myself to move around the room, checking corners, adjusting boxes and chairs to fill the cracks of shadow. It felt useless. Shadows had always been there, even when you could not see them. How could you block something that was part of the air itself? Still, moving kept my mind from splintering. My hands shook as I stacked an old cardboard box on top of another, filling a space I thought looked too dark. The footsteps outside had grown more irregular. At first the figures had marched in perfect unison, circling the houses like soldiers on patrol. Now they scattered. Sometimes I heard 2 or 3 moving together, their shoes crunching on gravel, and sometimes it was a lone set of steps dragging slowly past the basement windows. Once in a while, one of them would stop directly above us. The floorboards groaned under their weight, and then the voice came, muffled but clear. "Police, open the door." Always the same words. Always that warped tone, too flat, too long. At 3:15, the phone buzzed again. I pulled it from under the mattress where I had hidden it earlier. The screen glowed weak red, the letters sharp against the black. "Do not attempt communication. Do not attempt to confirm identities. They will use voices of the familiar. Survive until dawn." I read it silently, not daring to let my sister hear this time. She was already on the edge, her lips trembling as she mouthed words I could not understand. I slipped the phone back under the mattress and sat beside her. She leaned against me, her breath shallow, eyes wide. Minutes dragged like hours. The bulb flickered once, dimming just long enough to make my stomach lurch. My sister whimpered and pressed closer to me. I whispered that it was fine, that the light would hold. Even as I said it, I did not believe it. At 3:30 the knocks came again, not from the front door this time, but from the small basement window at ground level. 3 sharp taps against the glass. I froze. The window was so small that no person could fit through it, yet the sound was unmistakable. A second later the voice followed, louder now, clearer than before. "Police, open the door." My sister screamed into her blanket, muffling the sound. I grabbed the flashlight from her lap and aimed it at the window. For a split second I thought I saw a face pressed against the glass, pale and smooth like wax, eyes too large and too still. Then the bulb overhead steadied again, and the window was empty. I staggered back, clutching the flashlight until my fingers hurt. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. They knew where we were. They had always known. The next knock came from the door itself, so hard the couch jolted forward an inch. Dust fell from the ceiling, peppering my hair and shoulders. The voice followed, distorted into something almost inhuman. "Police, open the door." The words were dragged so slow they sounded like groans. I pushed the couch back with all my weight, grunting under my breath. My sister held the flashlight beam steady, her hands trembling but her aim true. The light caught the edges of the doorframe, and for a moment the knocking stopped. At 3:45, another sound cut through the silence. Not knocking this time, but whispering. Dozens of voices, layered and broken, seeping through the cracks in the door. Some of them sounded like neighbors, some like strangers, and one of them was Mom. Her voice was faint but clear, calling my name the way she used to when dinner was ready. I felt my body go rigid, every muscle straining toward the sound. My throat tightened, and I almost answered before my sister's hand clamped onto my arm. She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. I swallowed hard, pressing my lips shut until they hurt. The whispering continued for minutes, weaving in and out of one another, until it was impossible to separate words from noise. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence after was unbearable. My sister buried her face into my shoulder, her body trembling with each shaky breath. I stroked her hair with a shaking hand, whispering over and over that we just had to hold on until dawn, but doubt chewed at me. What if dawn never came? At 4 o'clock, the bulb above us sputtered and dimmed. The glow weakened to a sickly yellow, shadows stretching long across the floor. My chest seized. I scrambled to the shelf in the corner, grabbing a box of old camping supplies. I ripped it open, tossing aside tangled ropes and empty cans until I found 2 lanterns. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped them. I flicked one on, relief flooding me when its beam cut strong through the room. My sister grabbed the second, setting it beside her blanket like a shield. The bulb flickered again and went out completely, plunging us into the glow of the lanterns. The shadows pressed immediately against the edges of the light, writhing and trembling as if alive. Faces flickered in them, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. I held my breath, clutching the tire iron in one hand and the flashlight in the other. The knocks grew faster, angrier. The door rattled, hinges squealing under the strain. My sister whimpered, but kept her lantern steady, her small body glowing in the halo of its light. I pressed harder against the couch, whispering through clenched teeth that it would hold, that the dawn was close. At 4:15, another alert buzzed from my phone. The red glow lit the basement in an eerie pulse. I picked it up with shaking hands and read the words, "They have replaced those taken. If your loved one answers, it is not them." My stomach dropped. I looked at my sister, her face pale, eyes wide. I thought of Mom's voice whispering through the door, the perfect imitation. I thought of Mr. Phi. Carlson opening his door and never returning. My chest ached with the weight of it. These things were not just taking people, they were becoming them. I shoved the phone away, unable to look at her for a moment, terrified of what I might see in her eyes. She leaned against me, whispering that she was scared. Her voice cracked in a way that felt too human, too raw to be anything else. I held her tight, clinging to that small piece of hope. The knocking slowed again, 3 measured raps, then silence. I leaned back against the couch, my arms shaking with exhaustion. My throat was raw from whispering, my body sore from holding the barricade. The lanterns hummed softly, their beams steady but not eternal. The shadows trembled at the edges of their glow, patient, endless. I realized then that surviving until dawn might not be enough. If dawn never came, if the sun did not rise, we could only last as long as the batteries, as long as the light. And when the light died, so would we. By 4:30, the basement smelled of sweat and candle wax and dust, the air thick enough that every breath scraped my throat. The lanterns hummed faintly, casting their circles of light against the concrete walls, but the shadows pressed harder than before. They pulsed against the edges, shapes swelling and retreating like waves against a shore. Each time the glow trembled, the faces appeared, white eyes, open mouths, frozen in silent screams. My sister clutched her blanket and the smaller lantern, her lips moving silently. I did not know if she was praying or repeating the words of the alert, but I knew better than to interrupt. The knocking had grown less frequent. Instead, the voices filled the gaps, sliding through the walls in tones that bent and broke like warped recordings. Sometimes they called my name. Sometimes they said hers. Sometimes they spoke in voices we knew. Mom, Dad, neighbors, even my own voice twisted back at me, begging me to open the door. Each time I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. It was the only thing that kept me from answering. At 4:45, the couch against the door shifted forward an inch. The lantern light quivered, shadows spilling across the edges. My sister screamed, clapping her hands over her mouth too late, and the knocking returned instantly. 3 sharp raps that shook the frame. The voice followed, deeper and slower than ever, each word dragging into the next. "Police, open the door." I slammed my back against the couch. The tire iron gripped tight in my sweaty hands. My breath came in ragged bursts, heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo through the walls. The door rattled again, harder this time, but the hinges held. The lantern light glowed steady, cutting across the trembling wood. I whispered to myself over and over, "Survive until dawn, survive until dawn." The words felt more like a plea than a plan. The next alert came at 4:50. My phone buzzed against the concrete floor, screen lighting the room with its sickly red glow. I picked it up with shaking fingers. The words filled the screen in stark letters. Dawn confirmed. Hold light until sunrise. Do not open doors. Do not respond. Survive. I read it twice, the words settling into me like a weight I had been carrying too long finally set down. Dawn was coming. The night would end. My chest tightened with something close to hope, though it was fragile, a thread that could snap with the next knock. I showed the screen to my sister, and for the first time all night her eyes lit with something other than fear. She clutched my arm, whispering, "It's almost over." The shadows did not retreat. If anything, they pressed closer, as though they knew time was running out. The faces blurred together, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their eyes white, their mouths stretching wider than before. They stared at us through the black, unblinking, waiting for the lanterns to fail. I shifted closer to my sister, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, and whispered that we would see the sun soon. At 5 o'clock, the first pale light slipped across the edges of the basement window. My chest seized with relief so sudden I nearly sobbed. I scrambled to my feet and moved to the glass, brushing dust away with trembling hands. The sky outside was not bright, not yet, but it was changing, softening from black to gray. My throat tightened, and I whispered, "It's real." The shadows hissed. I swear I heard it, a sound like steam escaping a pipe, low and angry. They recoiled slightly from the window, their edges shivering. The faces blurred and melted back into the dark. My sister let out a sob that sounded half like laughter, clutching her lantern tighter. We watched together as the gray brightened, shifting slowly to the first faint streaks of orange. The knocking stopped. The voices fell silent. For the first time in hours, the house was still. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, the tears coming hot and fast, and whispered thank you to no one in particular. By 5:30, the sunlight cut clear across the floor of the basement. The shadows retreated in long, jerking motions, folding into themselves as though dragged away by invisible hands. One by one, they slipped back through the cracks, seeping out of the windows, out of the corners, until only the glow of the lanterns and the warmth of the sun remained. The air grew lighter, easier to breathe, the weight pressing on my chest lifting at last. When the light filled the room fully, I dared to move the couch from the door. My sister clung to me, whispering not to, but I had to know. The wood was cold under my hands, but still intact, the hinges unbroken. I pulled the door open slowly. Nothing waited on the other side. The house above was quiet, sunlight cutting across the floors and walls. No cruisers lined the street. No figures stood on the porch. The neighborhood looked still and empty, as though the night had never happened. Mr. Carlson's door across the street still hung open. His porch light burned faint against the dawn. No movement came from inside. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to look away. There would be time for grief later. For now, survival was enough. I led my sister upstairs, each step lighter than the last, the warmth of the rising sun spilling across us. She clutched my arm, her blanket dragging behind her, her face streaked with tears but calmer than it had been all night. We stood together in the kitchen, watching the light grow brighter through the windows. The house hummed with silence, ordinary silence, the kind that had once seemed empty but now felt like salvation. I picked up the phone from the counter. No new alerts had come. The last words remained burned into the screen, faint against the fading red. Dawn confirmed. Survive. I turned it off and set it face down, not wanting to see it again. By 6 o'clock, the sun stood fully above the horizon, washing the houses in gold. My sister leaned against me, eyes closed, breathing steady for the first time. I wrapped an arm around her and stared at the street, the memory of the night still raw but dulled by the light. The cruisers were gone, the figures were gone. Only the sunlight remained, bright and unrelenting, filling every shadow until there was no space left for them to hide. We had survived. That was all that mattered. And as long as the sun kept rising, as long as the light held, I knew we would never open the door to knocking in the dark again. I don't know how to explain what I saw that night. Even now, thinking about it makes my stomach twist and my skin crawl. It was one of those nights when sleep felt impossible, the air in the room heavy and restless. I was lying there in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, trying to will myself to drift off. Outside, the world was quiet, too quiet. That kind of deep silence that feels like it is pressing in on you from all sides. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up to a noise. It was not loud, just this soft scraping sound that seemed to echo in the darkness. At first, I thought it was the branches of the old oak tree outside, maybe the wind pushing them against the building. But the sound kept going. This steady, deliberate rhythm that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I sat up in bed, my heart already beating faster. The scraping was coming from the window, the one that looked out over the small strip of woods behind the complex. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal, maybe a bird, but there was something about it that felt wrong. I pulled back the curtain just a crack, and that was when I saw him. He was tall and pale, his skin almost glowing in the dim light from the street lamp. He was naked, completely and utterly exposed, and he was clinging to the drain pipe just outside my window. His fingers were wrapped so tight around the metal that I could see his knuckles white and straining. His ribs stood out in sharp relief every time he took a breath, each inhale so deep and ragged that I could hear it through the glass. He did not move. He just stood there, staring at me with these wide, unblinking eyes that seemed to shimmer in the half-dark. For a moment, I could not move either. I just stood there, the curtain bunched in my hand, my breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a scream. I do not know how long we stayed like that. Maybe seconds, maybe longer. But it felt like an eternity, the two of us locked in that silent, frozen moment. My mind was racing, every nerve in my body screaming at me to do something. Call the police, run, hide, but I could not seem to make myself move. Finally, he shifted. Slowly, like every movement was deliberate, he turned his head and looked away from me, down at the ground below. Then, hand over hand, he began to climb down the drain pipe. His bare feet slipped once on the metal, but he did not make a sound, just kept going, inch by inch, until he reached the ground. I watched him walk away, his pale skin catching the light as he moved into the shadows of the trees. The woods swallowed him up, and then he was gone, like he had never been there at all. I stood there for a long time after that, the curtain still clenched in my fist, my whole body shaking. My mouth felt dry and my legs felt like they would not hold me if I tried to walk. I kept thinking about the way he had looked at me, the way he had not seemed surprised to see me staring back, like he had been expecting me. Eventually, I managed to close the curtain and back away from the window. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. I felt like I could still hear his breathing, that ragged, hungry sound echoing in my ears. I called the police a few minutes later. My voice was calm, too calm, like it was not really me speaking. I told them what I had seen, about the man outside my window, about the way he had climbed down and vanished into the woods. They said they would send someone to check it out, that I should lock my doors and stay inside. I did what they said. I checked every lock in the apartment twice, then a third time for good measure. I turned on every light and sat in the middle of the living room, my phone clutched in my hand. I could not stop shaking, my mind replaying the image of that man over and over again. The way he had stood there, so still and silent, like he was waiting for something. The police came about 30 minutes later. I could see the flash of their flashlights outside moving through the trees, the beams cutting through the darkness. They knocked on my door and I let them in, trying to keep my voice steady as I told them everything again. They nodded, their faces serious but calm, and said they would keep looking. They found footprints in the dirt under my window, bare footprints, deep and clear in the soft earth, but there was nothing else, no clothes, no sign of who he was or where he had gone. Just those footprints leading away into the trees like a trail of ghosts. They said they would patrol the area for the rest of the night, but there was not much else they could do. One of the officers gave me a sympathetic smile and told me to get some rest, that it was probably just some transient, someone passing through, but I could see it in his eyes. He was as unsettled as I was. After they left, I sat in the living room for a long time, the lights still on, my back pressed against the couch. I did not want to go back to the bedroom, did not want to see that window again. I kept thinking about the way he had looked at me, the way his chest had heaved with every breath, the way he had not seemed afraid at all. I do not know what he wanted or why he had chosen my window, but I know I will never forget the way he looked in the dark, pale and still and utterly human. And I know that even if I never see him again, I will always wonder if he is still out there, watching. The next morning, the world looked exactly the same as it always did. The sun rose and painted everything gold. The birds sang in the trees, and the air smelled like fresh-cut grass and warm pavement. But nothing felt normal to me. Everything felt too bright, too loud, like the world was moving on without noticing the crack that had split open in my life the night before. I tried to go about my usual routine, made coffee, fed the cat, turned on the news just to hear another human voice in the room, but every small sound made me jump. The scrape of a chair against the floor, the creak of the old pipes in the wall, they all felt too close, like they were happening right beside me instead of somewhere in the house. I kept thinking about the man I had seen, his pale skin, the way his ribs moved with each breath, the way he had not even flinched when he saw me watching him. I could not get that image out of my head, no matter how hard I tried. At work, I tried to act like everything was normal. My coworkers made small talk about the weather, about the football game the night before. I smiled and nodded, but inside I felt hollow. My mind kept drifting back to the window, to the woods behind my building, to the footprints the police had found in the dirt. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to stand up in the middle of the office and shout, "I saw him. I saw something I cannot explain," but I did not. I kept it locked inside, where it felt like it was growing bigger and colder by the hour. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights on and the curtains closed. I could not bring myself to go into the bedroom. I kept replaying it all in my head, the scraping sound, the way he had just stood there, the way he had finally turned and disappeared into the trees. I thought about how close he had been, just a thin pane of glass and a few feet of empty air between us. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Not his features. Really, it was too dark to see them clearly, but the shape of him, the stillness, the certainty. It was like he had not been surprised to see me there at all, like he had been waiting for me to look. The next morning I called the police station to ask if they had found anything else. The officer who answered was polite but vague. "We're still looking into it," he said. "We've had a couple of reports of suspicious activity in the area, but nothing concrete." I thanked him and hung up. but his voice had that same careful calm that told me he did not really believe anything would come of it. Maybe he thought it was just some stranger passing through, someone with nowhere else to go, but I knew better. That afternoon, I went out back and walked along the edge of the woods. I told myself I was just getting some fresh air, but really I was looking for something, anything, a footprint, a piece of clothing, some sign that what I had seen was real and not just a dream I could not wake up from. The ground was soft from the rain the night before, and I could see marks in the dirt, small depressions where someone had walked. They could have been from anyone, I told myself. A neighbor, a kid playing in the trees, but they felt like a message, like a path that led back to that window and the man who had watched me. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind in the leaves and the distant hum of traffic. I kept expecting to hear that breathing again, the harsh, ragged sound of someone just outside my sight. But the woods were quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like it was holding its breath. When I went back inside, I locked the door behind me and checked every window twice. I tried to tell myself that I was being silly, that I was letting my fear turn something small into something bigger. But deep down I knew that what I had seen was real, and I knew that it was not over. That night I tried to go to bed like normal. I turned off the lights, pulled the covers up around me, and closed my eyes. But every time I started to drift off, I would jolt awake, sure I had heard something, a scrape, a breath, a whisper that was not really there. I finally gave up and went to sit in the living room again. I wrapped a blanket around myself and stared at the door to the balcony, half expecting to see him there, pressed against the glass. But there was nothing, just the soft glow of the street lights and the distant sound of a car engine somewhere far away. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up with a start to the sound of something moving outside. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear. I got up slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop, to go back to bed and pretend I had not heard anything. I pulled back the curtain just a little, just enough to see. He was there. Standing at the edge of the woods, his pale body almost glowing in the darkness. He was closer this time, just at the edge of the light from the street lamp. I could see the shape of him clearly, the way he stood so still, like he was part of the trees. He was watching me. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there, but I could not look away. We stood there like that for what felt like hours, locked in this silent, terrible moment. And then, as slowly and carefully as before, he turned and walked back into the trees. I do not know what he wants. I do not know why he chose my window, my building, my life. But I know he will come back, and I know that next time, I might not be brave enough to just stand there and watch. The next few days passed in a haze. I went to work, I went through the motions, but I could not shake the feeling that he was always there, watching, waiting. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his pale face, the way his ribs seemed to move with each ragged breath, the way he never flinched, never looked away, even when I did. At work, I felt like I was moving through a world that did not quite fit anymore. My co-workers talked and laughed and shared weekend plans like nothing had changed, like the world was still safe. But I could not join in. I felt like there was a pane of glass between me and everyone else, and on the other side was that man, breathing softly in the dark. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room, the lights on, the curtains drawn tight. It did not help much. I still woke up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding in the darkness. Sometimes I would think I heard that scraping sound again, soft and patient, like fingers tracing the window frame. Other times it was just the wind, but I never really knew. One evening, I decided to go for a walk just to clear my head. The sun was setting, the sky painted in soft pinks and oranges that almost made me forget how heavy everything felt. I walked slowly, letting the air fill my lungs, trying to remind myself that the world was still there, that it was still turning. As I walked past the edge of the woods, I stopped. There, in the dirt, were footprints. Bare footprints, long and narrow, pressed deep into the soft earth. My breath caught in my chest. I crouched down, reaching out to touch the edge of one. The dirt was still damp from the rain the night before, the shape of his toes clear and sharp. I stood up quickly, my hands shaking. I looked around, half expecting to see him standing there just beyond the tree line, watching me. But the woods were quiet, the shadows deep and still. I backed away slowly, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I went home and locked the door behind me, turning every light in the apartment on. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, trying to calm my breathing, my mind replaying the feel of the dirt under my fingers. The shape of those footprints felt burned into my memory. That night, I could not bring myself to sit by the window. I turned the couch to face the door instead, as if that would keep me safer. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders and waited for the night to end. At exactly 3 a.m, I heard the noise again. Not the soft scrape of branches or the hum of the refrigerator. It was breathing, slow, steady, too deep and too close to be mine. I held my breath, my hands gripping the edge of the blanket so hard it hurt. I did not move. I did not even blink. The breathing went on for what felt like forever, each inhale and exhale a quiet promise in the darkness. Finally, it stopped. I waited for a long time after that, listening to the silence that followed, half afraid to believe it was really gone. In the morning, I checked the window. There were smudges on the glass, faint and oily, like the marks left by fingertips. I ran my hand over them, feeling the cold smoothness of the glass, and shivered. I called the police again, my voice calm and measured, even though my hands were shaking. I told them about the footprints, about the breathing outside the window. They said they would send someone to look around. But when they came, all they found were those same footprints, leading to the edge of the woods and disappearing into the trees. They told me they would keep an eye on the area, that they would increase patrols, but I could hear it in their voices. They thought it was just a drifter, someone passing through. They did not see the way he looked at me, the way he stood so still, like he was part of the night itself. After they left, I sat in the living room for a long time, the quiet pressing in on me. I thought about moving, about packing a bag and leaving everything behind, but I knew it would not matter. Wherever I went, I would still see him in the dark. I would still feel his breath on the glass. That night, I dreamed about him. I dreamed I was standing at the window, the glass cold against my forehead. Outside, he was waiting. He was closer than before, his face just inches away. His eyes were so dark, like the night had found a way to crawl inside him and never leave. In the dream, he raised a hand and pressed it against the glass, his fingers splayed and thin. I raised mine too, and for a moment it felt like we were touching, like the cold of the window was the only thing that kept him from pulling me out into the night. I woke up gasping, my heart racing, the sheets tangled around my legs. I could still feel the cold of the glass, the weight of his gaze on me, even though I was alone in the room. I sat up and looked around the living room, every shadow suddenly sharp and alive. I got up and checked the locks again, even though I knew they were all still closed. It was not the locks that scared me. It was the feeling that he did not need them, that if he wanted to come in, nothing I did would stop him. I do not know how long this will go on. I do not know what he wants or why he keeps coming back, but I know that I will never forget the way he looked at me, the way he breathed in the dark. And I know that no matter how bright the morning sun, I will always be waiting for that scraping sound to come again. The next day felt like a blur of static in my head. I went to work, but everything felt off. The lights in the office seemed too bright, the hum of the air conditioning too loud, and the voices of my coworkers all blurred together like white noise. I moved through the day like a ghost, nodding and smiling when I had to, but always with one ear turned inward, listening for the echo of his breathing, even when I knew he was not there. When I got home that evening, I stood in the doorway for a long time before I stepped inside. The apartment smelled like coffee and soap and something else, something sharp and clean that reminded me of hospitals. I told myself it was just the scent of the cleaning spray I had used that morning, but I could not shake the thought that it was something else, something left behind by him. I walked through each room slowly, checking every lock, every window. I knew they were all secure, but I had to be sure. When I finally reached the bedroom, I stood in the doorway and stared at the window. The curtains were drawn tight, but I could still feel the cold of the glass, the memory of his hand pressed against it in my dreams. I turned away and went to the living room, pulling the couch closer to the center of the room so I could see every doorway. I turned on the television, not because I wanted to watch it, but because I needed the noise. The chatter of the newscasters was thin and artificial, but it was enough to keep the silence at bay. As the night settled in around me, I tried to read a book, but the words would not stay in my head. My eyes kept drifting to the window, to the faint movement of the curtains in the draft. Every creak of the floorboards felt like footsteps. Every brush of the wind against the glass felt like a hand reaching out to find me. I tried to tell myself that I was being paranoid, that he would not come back again, but I knew better. I knew the way he had looked at me, the way he had stood there like he was waiting for something only he could see. Around midnight, I turned off the television and sat in the dark, listening. The night outside was quiet, the distant sound of cars on the main road, the only sign that the world was still turning. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and closed my eyes, focusing on the rhythm of my breathing. I do not know how long I sat there like that. Time felt slippery, like it was stretching out into something that did not have an end. I must have drifted off at some point, because I woke up to the sound of something moving outside. It was not loud, just a soft shifting in the darkness, a careful, deliberate sound that made my blood run cold. I sat perfectly still, my heart thudding so hard I thought it would wake the whole neighborhood. Slowly, I turned my head to the window. The curtains were still closed, but I could see the faint outline of movement behind them, a shadow, tall and thin, swaying slightly like it was breathing with me. I did not move. I did not dare. I watched the shape for what felt like forever. My hands clenched so tight in the blanket that my knuckles ached. I could hear my own breath, shaky and too loud in the silence. Then, as if it knew I was watching, the shape leaned closer. I could hear it now, the ragged sound of its breathing, so much like mine but not mine at all. The slow drag of air in and out, like it was trying to match the rhythm of my own lungs. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but sit there. But I could not move. My body felt like it was made of stone, every muscle locked in place by a fear that went deeper than anything I had ever known. The shadow stayed there for a long time, just breathing, and then, as slowly and carefully as it had appeared, it slipped away. The curtains stopped moving. The air in the room felt less heavy, and I was alone again. I sat there until the sun started to rise, the first pale light of morning pushing back the darkness. When I finally stood up, my legs were stiff and shaky, and my head felt like it was full of fog. I went to the window and pulled the curtains back. The street below was empty, the world washed clean by the light of dawn. There was no sign of him, no footprints, no smudges on the glass. Just the quiet of a new day. But I knew he had been there. I could still feel the cold where his breath had touched the window, could still hear the echo of that ragged sound in the back of my mind. I called the police again, my voice calm but tight. I told them what I had seen, about the shape behind the curtains, the breathing. They said they would send someone to look around, but I could hear the doubt in their voices. I did not blame them. Even as I said the words out loud, they sounded crazy to me too. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. When the police came, they walked through the woods again, their flashlights cutting through the trees like thin blades of light. They found nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone having been there at all. After they left, I sat in the living room, the morning light creeping slowly across the floor. I thought about the way he had watched me, the way he had moved so silently through the night. I thought about how close he had been, just a breath away from me. I do not know what he wants. I do not know if he will come back tonight, or if he is already here, standing just outside the reach of the light, but I know that I will be ready. I will sit in the quiet and listen, and I will not look away, because I know now that he is not just a man, he is something else, something that does not need a name to be real. And I know that no matter how bright the sun, he is still out there waiting. The next few days were a kind of quiet torment. Each morning I woke up exhausted, the memory of those long hours of darkness clinging to me like a second skin. I went through my routines, work and home, and the small rituals I used to keep the world feeling normal, but it all felt like a performance, like I was going through the motions of a life that no longer fit. My co-workers did not notice, or if they did, they were kind enough to pretend. I would see them looking at me sometimes, eyes flicking up from their screens, a moment of concern that quickly passed. I could not blame them. I did not know how to explain it to myself, let alone to anyone else. At home, I kept the curtains drawn tight. Every night I moved the couch again, pulling it closer to the center of the room. It felt like the only place where I could see everything at once, the only place where I might have a chance to keep him from slipping inside. I had stopped calling the police. I knew they would not find anything. They had come 3 times already, each time walking the perimeter of the building with their flashlights and polite questions. each time leaving without answers. I could see it in their faces, the careful patience of people who thought they were dealing with someone on the edge. I knew what they thought, that I was seeing things, imagining it all in the darkness. Maybe part of me even wanted to believe that too, but I couldn't. Not when I had seen him so clearly. Not when I could still hear the way he breathed, deep and ragged and too close. One night, I tried something different. I left the window open a crack, just enough to let in the cold night air. I wanted to see if he would come closer if there was nothing between us but a thin veil of air. I do not know why. Maybe I thought it would be better to face him than to keep waiting for him to come to me. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, and waited. The hours passed slowly. The city around me was quiet, the usual sounds of traffic and distant voices muted by the heavy darkness. I watched the curtains move in the faint breeze, the way the moonlight painted shifting patterns on the floor. Around 3 a.m, I heard it again. That slow, careful breathing just outside the window. My heart froze in my chest. I forced myself to stay still, to keep watching. I saw the curtain move just a little. A pale hand, long fingers splayed, pressed against the glass. The skin was so white it almost glowed in the moonlight, the veins beneath it dark and thin. I could see the way his ribs rose and fell with each breath, the slow heave of his chest. He did not speak. He did not move beyond that. He just stood there, breathing, his fingers leaving faint smudges on the glass. I could feel the air from his lungs, cold and damp, seeping into the room. I do not know how long we stayed like that. It felt like hours, though I know it was only minutes. Then, as slowly and deliberately as he had appeared, he pulled his hand back. The curtain settled into place, and the breathing stopped. I sat there, my whole body trembling, and listened to the silence. It felt heavier than any noise could have been, a thick blanket of quiet that pressed in on my chest. When dawn came, I got up and opened the window all the way. The air smelled fresh, clean, like rain. I leaned out and looked down. There were footprints in the dirt, the same bare prints I had seen before, leading away into the trees. I closed the window and sat back down. My head felt light, my hands numb. I kept thinking about the way his hand had looked against the glass, the way it had seemed almost gentle, like a question he was asking that I did not know how to answer. At work that day, I could barely concentrate. My boss asked me to stay late, some last-minute report that needed to be done. I said yes, even though I knew I would not be able to focus. Anything to keep me out of the apartment for a little while longer. When I finally got home, the sun was already down, the air cool and still. I stood in front of the building for a long time, staring up at my window. It looked so normal from the outside, just another square of darkness in a row of dark windows, but I knew what waited on the other side of that glass. I went inside and locked the door behind me. I did not turn on the lights. I sat on the couch in the dim glow from the street lamp outside and listened. The quiet felt almost like a living thing, a presence that pressed against my skin. I do not know how to explain what happened next. It was not a sound, not exactly, more like a shift in the air, a sudden awareness that he was there. I turned slowly, and he was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, just a few feet away. His skin was as pale as ever, his eyes dark and hollow in the shadows. He was breathing slowly, his chest rising and falling with that same deliberate rhythm. I could see every bone, every line of muscle beneath his skin. He did not speak, he did not smile, he just watched me, his head tilted slightly to one side like he was studying me. I could not move. My whole body felt locked in place, every instinct screaming to run, but my legs refusing to listen. We stared at each other for what felt like a lifetime, the silence between us thick and suffocating. Then, as if he had made some silent decision, he turned and walked back into the kitchen. I heard the faint sound of the back door opening, the soft scrape of his feet on the floor, and then he was gone. I sat there until the sun rose, the first light of day washing the fear from the corners of the room. But it did not wash it from me. The morning after he stood in my kitchen doorway felt like I was walking through a fog. I moved around the apartment slowly, touching everything like I needed to be sure it was real. The kitchen table, the edge of the sink, the soft worn rug beneath my feet. The apartment was exactly the same as it had always been, but it felt different somehow. Like something invisible had been shifted just enough to make me question every shadow, every creak of the floorboards. I kept expecting to find some sign that he had been here, a footprint, a smudge on the door, but there was nothing, just the same quiet, empty rooms. I tried to tell myself that it was over, that maybe I would not see him again, but deep down I knew better. I could feel it in the air, that thick, electric tension that never really went away. I thought about calling someone, about telling a friend or even my mother what had happened, but the words felt too heavy to say out loud. I knew how it would sound. Like a bad dream or a story I had made up to scare myself. I did not want to see that look in their eyes, the one that said they were trying to understand but did not really believe. So I kept it to myself. I went to work and smiled at my co-workers. I answered emails and filed reports. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing in my kitchen, pale and still, and utterly patient, waiting for something I could not name. At night, I sat on the couch with the lights on, my eyes fixed on the window. I thought about moving, about packing up and leaving everything behind, but I knew that would not change anything. I could go anywhere, start over 100 times, and he would still find me, because he was not just a man in the dark. He was something that lived in the spaces between waking and sleep, in the soft edges of the night that never really belonged to the day. I decided to do something I had been too afraid to try. I went out to the woods behind the building in the daylight, my feet crunching softly on the leaves and twigs. The sun was bright, the air cool and sweet. It felt almost normal, almost safe. I walked slowly, looking for anything that might explain why he kept coming back to me. I did not find much. A few broken branches, a faint path where the dirt was pressed down, but no answers, no sign of where he had come from or where he went when he disappeared into the trees. I stood there for a long time listening to the soft rustle of the wind in the leaves. I thought about how he had looked at me, the way he had never seemed surprised or afraid, like he had always known that I would be here, waiting. That night, I went back to my routine, the couch, the blanket, the soft murmur of the television turned low just to keep the silence at bay. But there was something different in the air, a kind of stillness that felt almost peaceful. At exactly 3 a.m, I heard the scrape of his hand on the glass. My breath caught, my heart beating so hard I thought it would crack my ribs, but I did not move. I just sat there, my hands clenched in the blanket, and waited. The curtain moved slowly, and he was there, standing just outside the window, his pale skin almost silver in the moonlight. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I thought I saw something like sadness there, a flicker of something that was not hunger or malice, but a quiet, endless loneliness. He raised his hand and pressed it against the glass. I did not flinch this time. I raised my hand too, and for a moment, it felt like we were touching. The cold of the glass, the soft whisper of breath on the other side. It was not comfort, but it was not fear either. Just a quiet recognition, a moment of understanding that I did not have words for. We stayed like that for a long time, the night holding its breath around us. Then, as slowly as he had come, he stepped back. He turned and walked into the woods, the darkness closing around him like a door. I sat there until the sun rose, the first light of dawn painting the world in soft gold. I felt tired, but it was a clean, quiet tired, not the frantic, panicked exhaustion that had lived in me for so long. I do not know if he will come back. Maybe he has finally found what he was looking for, or maybe he will always be out there, just beyond the edge of the light. But I am not afraid anymore. I have seen him. I have stood in that silence and let it wash over me. And I know that whatever he was, whatever he is, he was never really mine to fear. The next morning I opened all the windows and let the cool air fill the apartment. I washed the blankets, cleaned every corner, letting the scent of soap and fresh air push out the last of the shadows. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the sun warm on my skin. It felt like the first breath I had taken in a long time. Sometimes late at night I still think I hear him, a soft scrape against the window, a breath that is not quite mine. But I do not run, I do not hide. I just sit in the quiet and let the darkness be what it is, because I know now that there is nothing left to fear in it, nothing but the soft echo of my own heart, steady and strong in the night. And that, I think, is enough.